The train's whistle cut through the thick Montana heat like a blade through silk, announcing Lenora Whitfield's arrival into a future she thought she understood. She was wrong about everything. Red Hollow sprawled across the valley like a wound that refused to heal properly. Buildings thrown together without much thought, streets that turned to mud when it rained, and people who had learned to survive by keeping their heads down and their business to themselves. The kind of town where strangers were noticed immediately and judged even faster. Lenora stepped onto the wooden platform with her weathered suitcase gripped tight in one hand and the marriage contract folded inside her jacket pocket. 23 years old, traveling alone, wearing a dress that had been mended too many times to count. The journey from Philadelphia had taken 11 days, and every single one of those days had scraped away another layer of the girl she used to be. She wasn't soft anymore. Life had made sure of that, but she looked fragile. Pale skin stretched thin over delicate bones, dark hair pulled back severe, eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone her age. The kind of appearance that made people underestimate her immediately. That had always been her advantage, though she didn't realize it yet. The platform was crowded, more crowded than it should have been for a regular evening arrival. Lenora noticed that right away, the way too many eyes turned toward her the moment she appeared in the train car doorway. Whispers started before her feet even touched the ground. Someone had told them she was coming. A tall man pushed through the crowd, and Lenora knew instantly this was Caleb Voss. The letters they'd exchanged over 6 months hadn't included photographs, but she recognized him anyway from his confident stride, the expensive cut of his clothes, the way people moved aside without him asking. Wealth and power announced themselves in 100 small ways. She tried to smile, tried to make a good first impression despite the dust covering her traveling clothes and the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. Caleb stopped 3 feet away and just stared. His expression changed so fast Lenora almost missed it. Initial assessment shifting into immediate disappointment, then hardening into something closer to disgust. He looked her up and down like she was livestock that hadn't met his expectations. "This is what they sent me?" His voice carried across the entire platform, deliberate and cruel. "I paid good money to the marriage agency and they send me a starving little sparrow instead of a real ranch wife?" Laughter erupted instantly. Cowboys standing near the station house grinned and elbowed each other. A group of women by the water pump covered their mouths but couldn't hide their amusement. Even the station master turned away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Lenora felt heat flood her face. Not just embarrassment, humiliation so complete it seemed to press down on her chest until breathing became difficult. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from poverty and loneliness. The marriage contract represented her last chance at building any kind of stable future. And Caleb was destroying it in front of everyone. "Look at her," he continued, playing to the crowd now. "Probably blow away in the first strong wind. What exactly did you think you'd be able to do on a working ranch, sweetheart? Polish teacups? Arrange flowers?" More laughter, louder this time. A man in an expensive suit called out, "Maybe she can sew doilies while you handle the actual work, Caleb." "I specifically requested someone strong," Caleb said, circling around her now like she was something he was considering returning to the store. "Someone capable. Someone who wouldn't collapse after a single day of real labor. And this is what arrives?" Lenora wanted to defend herself, wanted to explain that strength came in forms besides physical size, that she'd survived circumstances these people couldn't imagine, that she wasn't the delicate flower he assumed. But her throat had closed up completely. Words wouldn't come. She just stood there while humiliation washed over her in waves. "The agency must have made a mistake," Caleb announced to the crowd. "Or maybe they're clearing out the rejects nobody else wanted." That broke something inside Lenora's paralysis. She lifted her chin and looked directly at Caleb Voss. Didn't say anything. Didn't cry or beg or apologize. Just met his eyes with a steady gaze that made him falter for half a second. "You haven't even asked my name," she said quietly. The platform fell silent. Caleb's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected her to speak. Hadn't expected resistance at all. Just immediate surrender. "I don't particularly care what it is," he said, recovering quickly. "You'll be getting back on a train heading east tomorrow morning anyway. The contract required someone suitable for frontier life. You clearly don't qualify. I'm sure any court would agree." He turned away from her then, already finished with the conversation. Several men from the crowd moved forward to join him, talking loudly about ranch business, deliberately ignoring Lenora like she'd already ceased to exist. The crowd began dispersing, entertainment over, time to return to their regular lives. Lenora stood alone on the platform with her single suitcase and the contract that had apparently become worthless the moment Caleb decided it was. She felt tears starting to build but refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. She was trying to decide whether to walk into town or just sit on the platform bench until morning when a voice spoke beside her. "You all right, miss?" Lenora turned and found an older man watching her with concern. He was maybe 40, weathered face, work-worn hands, clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-maintained. He held his hat in his hands, and his expression was genuine. "I'm fine," Lenora lied automatically. "No, you're not. Nobody would be after that performance." He glanced toward where Caleb had disappeared into the gathering dusk. "Man's a bastard. Pardon my language. Always has been." "You know him?" "Everyone knows Caleb Voss around here. Richest rancher in the county. Owns half the land between here and the territorial border." The man's expression darkened. "Also owns half the people, if we're being honest about it." Lenora picked up her suitcase. "I should find the hotel." "There's only one, and it's owned by Caleb's cousin. You won't get a room." That stopped her. "What?" "Caleb will have sent word already. Nobody in this town crosses him if they can help it." The man studied her face. "Where were you planning to go if the marriage didn't work out?" Lenora's silence was answer enough. The man sighed and settled his hat back on his head. "My name's Elias Boone. I've got a ranch about 6 miles outside town. The house has a spare room, and my housekeeper quit last month. I could use help getting the place organized, and you look like you could use somewhere to sleep that isn't this train platform." "I can't pay you. I'm offering you work, not charity. Cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping if you're capable. I'll provide room and board plus a small wage. Nothing fancy, but it's honest." Lenora studied him carefully. Years of surviving on her own had taught her to recognize danger in men's faces. But Elias Boone looked tired, not predatory. Worn down by life, not looking to take advantage of desperate women. Still, accepting rides from strange men in frontier towns wasn't exactly wise. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. Elias was quiet for a moment. "My wife died 4 years ago. I know what it's like when the world feels like it's ended and you can't see any way forward. If I can keep someone else from feeling that way, even for one night, seems like the decent thing to do." Something in his voice made Lenora believe him. "Just for tonight," she said finally, "until I figure out my next move." "Fair enough." They walked to where Elias had left his wagon at the edge of the platform. As Lenora climbed up, she noticed Caleb Voss watching them from across the street, standing in the doorway of what looked like an expensive saloon. His expression had shifted from smug satisfaction to something harder to read. Almost like concern. That was strange. Why would he care where she went, as long as she left him alone? Elias noticed her looking. "Don't worry about him. Caleb's bark is worse than his bite." But Lenora wasn't so sure. Something about the way Caleb stared after them felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, more like calculating. Like he was running numbers in his head that didn't quite add up the way he expected. The wagon rolled out of town as the sun finished setting, and Lenora watched Red Hollow disappear behind them. She should have felt defeated, should have felt like this was rock bottom. Instead, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt alert. The ride to Elias's ranch took almost an hour along rough dirt roads that wound through rolling grassland. They didn't talk much. Elias seemed comfortable with silence, and Lenora was too exhausted to make conversation anyway. The ranch house appeared gradually through the dusk, a modest wooden structure badly in need of paint, surrounded by outbuildings that looked equally neglected. Fences sagged. Equipment lay scattered in the yard. Even in the dim light, Lenora could see this was a place where someone had given up trying. "I know it's not much," Elias said as he helped her down from the wagon. "Things have gotten away from me the past few years." "It's fine," Lenora said. And she meant it. After the humiliation on the train platform, anywhere that offered basic shelter felt like luxury. The inside of the house was dim and cluttered. Elias lit several lamps while Lenora stood in the doorway taking inventory. Dishes piled in the kitchen, papers scattered across every surface. Dust-coating furniture that had once been nice but now looked abandoned. The whole place felt heavy with loneliness. "Spare room's upstairs," Elias said. "I'll make sure the stove's working if you want tea." "Thank you." Lenora carried her suitcase up the narrow stairs and found the spare room. Small but clean enough, with a bed that had been made recently and a window overlooking dark fields. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, finally alone with the disaster her life had become. The contract was still in her jacket pocket. She pulled it out and unfolded it carefully, reading through the terms by lamplight. Standard marriage contract through the Frontier Settlement Agency. Caleb Voss had paid the agency fees, covered her travel expenses, and agreed to provide housing as his wife. In exchange, Lenora would fulfill all expected domestic duties and provide companionship. But there was another clause buried in the middle of the document, something about land rights and property transfers that she'd barely paid attention to when signing. At the time, she'd been so desperate to escape Philadelphia that legal details seemed unimportant. Now she read it more carefully. The marriage entitled her to a quarter section of territory adjacent to the Voss Ranch, held in trust pending completion of the marriage terms. If the marriage dissolved for cause attributed to the bride, the land reverted to the husband. If it dissolved for cause attributed to the husband, the land transferred to the bride. Lenora read that section 3 times. A quarter section was 160 acres, valuable property, especially in Montana territory where land meant everything. The clause seemed designed to prevent either party from backing out of the marriage without serious consideration. But something felt wrong about it. Why would Caleb Voss, who owned half the county according to Elias, care about gaining 160 acres through marriage? He could just buy land if he wanted it, unless he couldn't buy this particular land. Lenora folded the contract and slipped it back into her pocket, her mind working through possibilities she didn't fully understand yet. Tomorrow she'd need to find someone who could explain the legal specifics. Maybe the town had a lawyer who wasn't in Caleb's pocket. She went back downstairs and found Elias in the kitchen, heating water for tea. He'd cleared space at the table and set out 2 cups. "You look like you're thinking hard about something," he said. "The marriage contract. There's a land clause I don't fully understand." Elias poured hot water into the cups. "Land always complicates things out here. What does it say?" Lenora explained the quarter section provision while Elias listened carefully. His expression grew more serious as she talked. "That's the Whitmore Trust property," he said finally. "What's that?" "About 20 years ago, a wealthy rancher named Samuel Whitmore died without direct heirs. He left a fertile quarter section in trust for frontier settlement purposes, specifically for women traveling west to marry. The trust had conditions attached. If a marriage failed through the husband's fault, the wife received the land permanently. If it failed through the wife's fault, the land returned to open territory." "So Caleb gets the land if I'm the one who breaks the contract?" "Not exactly. If the bride abandons the marriage voluntarily, the trust collapses and the land goes to public auction. But Caleb would be first in line to purchase it at that point, and he's got enough money to outbid anyone." Lenora felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So if he can make me leave on my own, he gets the land without having to actually follow through on the marriage?" "Yeah." Elias met her eyes across the table. "How bad was the humiliation at the station?" "Bad enough that most women would have gotten back on the train immediately." "That's what I figured." Elias shook his head slowly. "Caleb's been trying to get his hands on the Whitmore Trust property for years. The land has the best water access in the entire county, but the trust terms are ironclad. He can't just buy it. He'd have to marry someone and then get divorced under terms that benefit him. So he arranged a marriage specifically planning to humiliate the bride into leaving? Looks that way, and he chose someone he thought would break easily." Elias studied her. "No offense, but you do look fragile, I know." Lenora wrapped her hands around the warm teacup. "Everyone thinks that. But you're still here. That wasn't supposed to happen." They sat in silence while Lenora processed everything. Caleb had orchestrated her entire journey west as part of an elaborate land scheme. The cruel mockery on the train platform wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated strategy designed to send her running before she understood what was really happening. She thought about that look on his face when she climbed into Elias's wagon, the concern that had replaced his earlier smugness. He was worried because she hadn't left. "What happens now?" Lenora asked. "That depends on what you want to do. You could head back east tomorrow like Caleb expects. Start over somewhere else. With what money? I spent everything I had just getting here. Then you stay and fight. Prove Caleb engineered the situation to defraud you. If you can demonstrate he deliberately tried to force you out of the marriage contract, the land transfers to you instead. How would I prove that? Elias stood and walked to a cluttered desk in the corner. He returned with a newspaper several months old and pointed to an advertisement in the classifieds. Experienced rancher seeks capable wife for frontier partnership. Must be strong, self-sufficient, and prepared for demanding physical labor. Delicate constitutions need not apply. Lenora stared at the advertisement. But that's the opposite of what he actually wanted. Exactly. He specifically advertised for someone strong, then rejected you for being too delicate. That proves the rejection was planned ahead of time, not based on your actual capabilities. Why would he do that? Why not just ask for delicate women if that's what he wanted? Because it had to look legitimate. The marriage agency wouldn't have approved a contract if Caleb's intentions seemed suspicious. So he asked for exactly what a real rancher would want, knowing he'd reject whoever showed up regardless of their actual qualities. Lenora read the advertisement again, her anger building. Caleb Voss had played her from the very beginning, selected her specifically because her appearance would make the fraud easier, planned the public humiliation to maximize her emotional distress, orchestrated every detail to make her run. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed she would be easy to break. I want the land, Lenora said quietly. Elias looked surprised. You sure? Fighting Caleb won't be easy. He's got money and influence, and he plays dirty. I'm sure. She met his eyes. I came here with nothing, expecting to build a life through partnership with someone who turned out to be a con artist. If I walk away now, I'll always be running from men like him. I'm tired of running. Then you'll need help. Caleb won't let this go without a fight. Why are you willing to help me? You barely know me. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Because I've watched Caleb Voss cheat and manipulate people for years, and nobody's ever called him on it. Maybe it's time someone did, and maybe, he paused, maybe I'm tired of watching everything fall apart while I do nothing about it. There was pain in his voice that went deeper than his struggling ranch. Lenora recognized it immediately, the exhaustion of someone who'd given up on things mattering. All right, she said. Tell me what I need to do. They talked late into the night, making plans. Elias explained that Red Hollow had a lawyer named Martin Hale who was honest but cautious. There was also a clerk at the Territory Bureau named Vivian Pierce who handled frontier marriage contracts and might have information about Caleb's dealings with the agency. Start with documentation, Elias advised. Get copies of everything related to the contract. Talk to Vivian and see what she knows about Caleb's arrangement with the agency. If we can prove he specifically requested someone he planned to reject, that shows intent to defraud. Will people help me? Everyone seemed pretty comfortable with what happened at the station. Some will, some won't. Red Hollow's a small town, and Caleb has long arms. But there are people who'd like to see him taken down a notch, even if they won't say it openly. Lenora thought about the women who'd laughed at her humiliation. Some had looked uncomfortable even while participating. Maybe they'd been in similar situations themselves, too afraid of Caleb's power to do anything but go along. I'll start in the morning, she said. Be careful. Once Caleb realizes you're not leaving quietly, he'll try other methods. What kind of methods? The kind that make trouble disappear. Elias's expression was grim. He's had people run out of town before. Business owners who wouldn't sell to him, ranchers who competed for water rights. They all ended up leaving eventually. I'm not leaving. Something in Lenora's voice made Elias study her more carefully. You've dealt with dangerous men before. It wasn't a question. Yes. She didn't elaborate, and Elias didn't push. They finished their tea in silence, and Lenora went back upstairs to the spare room. She lay awake for hours, exhausted but unable to stop her mind from working through everything she'd learned. Caleb Voss thought he'd found an easy victim, someone so desperate for security that she'd accept any treatment, someone fragile enough that public humiliation would send her running immediately. He'd been wrong on every count. Lenora had survived too much to be broken by mockery. She'd learned years ago that the world didn't care about fairness, so you had to fight for every inch of ground yourself. And she'd discovered something crucial tonight. Caleb needed her to leave voluntarily. That meant she had power in this situation, even if it didn't feel like it. As long as she stayed and fought, his scheme was in danger. Outside the window, Montana stretched endlessly under a cold moon. This harsh land had broken plenty of people before her, but Lenora wasn't planning to be one of them. Tomorrow she'd start gathering the evidence that would destroy Caleb Voss's carefully constructed fraud. Tonight, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to own 160 acres of prime Montana territory, land that nobody could take from her, a foundation to build an actual life on. She fell asleep planning her first steps, unaware that across town, Caleb Voss was having a very different conversation. In his expensive office above the saloon, Caleb paced while his lawyer watched nervously. "She should have left by now," Caleb said. "I made it unbearable. Humiliated her in front of the whole town. Most women would have gotten right back on that train." "Maybe she will tomorrow," the lawyer suggested. "No, she went with Elias Boone. That's worse. Boone's a nobody. His ranch is failing. He can't help her with anything. Boone used to be a territorial law clerk. He understands contracts." Caleb stopped pacing and faced his lawyer. "What happens if she doesn't leave, if she decides to fight?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Then you'd have to either follow through with the marriage or prove she violated the contract terms, which would be difficult since the marriage never actually began. What about the advertisement? Can she use that against me?" "Potentially. If she can demonstrate that you rejected her for reasons contrary to your stated requirements, it might constitute fraud." "Might?" "Contract law in the territory is still developing. It would depend on the judge." Caleb resumed pacing. He'd spent years positioning himself to acquire the Whitmore Trust property. The land wasn't just valuable, it was strategically crucial. With its water access, he could control irrigation for half the valley. Other ranchers would have to negotiate with him for access or watch their cattle die during dry summers. But the plan required the bride to abandon the contract voluntarily. If she stayed and fought, everything became complicated. "I want her gone," Caleb said. "Do whatever it takes." "Within legal bounds?" Caleb's look made the lawyer flinch. "Do whatever it takes," he repeated. The lawyer nodded and left quickly, already thinking through his options. Alone in his office, Caleb poured himself whiskey and stared out at the dark town below. He'd manipulated dozens of business deals, outmaneuvered countless competitors, and built an empire through calculated ruthlessness. One desperate woman shouldn't be a problem, but something about the way she'd looked at him on the platform bothered him. That moment when she'd lifted her chin and met his eyes instead of crying. There'd been something in her expression that he didn't expect. Not fear. Recognition. Like she'd seen men like him before and already knew what to expect. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. Caleb finished his whiskey and made a decision. Tomorrow he'd start applying pressure. Make it clear that staying in Red Hollow would be extremely uncomfortable. A few rumors, some social isolation, maybe some economic pressure on Elias Boone's ranch. Lenora Whitfield would leave. Everyone did eventually when Caleb wanted them gone. He just needed to make her understand that fighting him was pointless. What Caleb didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Lenora Whitfield had spent her entire life fighting pointless battles against impossible odds. And she'd gotten very good at winning them anyway. Morning came too early, pale light sliding through the window before Lenora felt remotely ready to face what she'd committed to the night before. Her body ached from the long journey and the thin mattress, but her mind was already working through the day ahead. She dressed in the same travel-worn clothes from yesterday. She only had 2 decent dresses and both needed washing, and made her way downstairs. Elias was already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. "There's bread if you're hungry," he said, nodding toward a half-eaten loaf on the counter. "Not fresh, but it's edible." Lenora cut herself a slice and ate. Standing up, watching through the window as the sun climbed higher over fields that clearly hadn't been properly tended in years. Fences sagging everywhere, weeds choking what should have been grazing land. The whole place screamed neglect. "How long has it been like this?" she asked. Elias followed her gaze. "Since Martha died. That's my wife. Was my wife." He corrected himself automatically, like he'd done it 1,000 times. 4 years now, I kept things running the first year, but after that," he shrugged, "stopped seeing the point, I guess." "You still own it, though. For now. Bank's been patient, but patience runs out eventually." He poured coffee into 2 chipped cups. Why are you asking? Because if I'm staying here temporarily, I might as well make myself useful. You said you needed help with bookkeeping? You know numbers? I worked in a textile factory for 3 years keeping production records. Then I managed household accounts for a wealthy family in Philadelphia before they decided they couldn't afford staff anymore. She took the coffee he offered. I can organize your books if you show me where you keep them. Elias looked surprised. That'd be helpful. They're a mess. Everything's a mess, Lenora said bluntly. When's the last time you balanced your accounts? Honestly, I'm not sure. She set down her coffee cup with more force than intended. You're not sure? How do you know what you owe or what's owed to you? I don't really. I just pay bills when they come and hope the money stretches. Elias rubbed his face tiredly. I know it's bad. Everything's bad. I just stopped caring enough to fix it. Lenora studied him for a moment, recognizing something in his defeated posture that she'd seen in herself plenty of times. The exhaustion that came from fighting losing battles until you couldn't remember why you were fighting anymore. Show me the books, she said. Then take me into town. I need to visit the Territory Bureau. Caleb will hear about it the minute you show your face. Good. Let him hear. Something in her voice made Elias look at her differently. You're really not afraid of him. I'm terrified of him, Lenora corrected. But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life running from men like him. There's a difference. They spent the next hour going through Elias's financial records, which were even worse than Lenora expected. Bills stuffed into drawers unopened, payment receipts mixed with feed orders from 2 years ago. No system, no organization, no clear picture of what he actually owed versus what he owned. This is going to take days to sort out, she said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. I told you it was bad. Bad doesn't begin to cover it. How are you even still operating? Barely. I sell enough cattle each year to cover the mortgage and basic supplies. Everything else just piles up. Lenora started organizing documents into rough categories: income, expenses, debts, assets. Her hands moved automatically, years of accounting work making the process familiar even when the situation was chaos. Within an hour, she had a clearer picture of Elias's finances than he'd probably had in years. You're not broke, she announced. You're disorganized. There's a difference. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. You've got 3 buyers who owe you money from last season's cattle sales. That's almost $400 just sitting uncollected. She pointed to several invoices. And you're paying twice what you should for feed because you're not buying in bulk. If you organized properly, you could cut expenses by 30% at least. Elias stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. How can you tell all that just from looking at this mess? Because I'm good at this. It's basically the only thing I'm good at. Lenora gathered the most urgent documents into a pile. We need to go to town. I'll visit the bureau while you talk to these 3 buyers about collecting what they owe you. Don't accept excuses. You need that money. They'll say they're having a rough season. Everyone's having a rough season. That's not your problem. You delivered cattle. They owe you payment. Simple as that. Elias looked at her with something close to admiration. You sound different than yesterday. Yesterday I was exhausted and humiliated. Today I'm angry and functional. There's a difference. She stood up and grabbed her shawl. Are we going or not? The ride into Red Hollow felt different in daylight. Lenora watched the landscape roll past and tried to imagine owning part of it. 160 acres. Enough land to build something real. Enough space that nobody could crowd her out or push her around. If she could actually win it. Town was busier than last night, people moving between shops and businesses, wagons parked along the main street, the general sounds of commerce and daily life. But Lenora noticed how conversation stopped when Elias's wagon rolled past, how people stared and whispered. Everyone already knew who she was. Ignore them, Elias said quietly. I'm used to it. He dropped her at the Territory Bureau, a small office wedged between a dry goods store and a barber shop, and continued down the street toward the cattle buyers. Lenora stood outside the bureau for a moment, steadying her nerves, then pushed through the door. The interior was cramped and overstuffed with filing cabinets and paperwork. A woman in her 30s sat behind a desk covered in official-looking documents, her dark hair pulled back severely, wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when Lenora entered, and her expression shifted immediately. You're the bride from yesterday, she said. Lenora Whitfield. And you are? Vivian Pierce. I manage frontier marriage contracts for the territory. She set down her pen carefully. I heard what happened at the station. I'm sorry. Sorry enough to help me? Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly. Help you how? Lenora approached the desk and kept her voice low. I want to see all the documentation related to my marriage contract with Caleb Voss. Everything the agency sent, everything he submitted, all correspondence. I have a right to review my own contract records. That's true, you do. But may I ask why? Because something doesn't add up, and I think you know it. Vivian studied her for a long moment, then stood and locked the office door. She pulled the window shade down. Sit, she said, gesturing to a chair. Lenora sat. Vivian returned to her desk and pulled out a thick file from a drawer. I shouldn't show you this. Technically, it's confidential agency business. But you're going to anyway. Because you're the fourth bride Caleb Voss has contracted through the Frontier Settlement Program in 3 years. And you're the fourth one he's rejected within 24 hours of arrival. The room went very quiet. 4 women? Lenore repeated. 4 that I know of. Could be more through other territory offices. Vivian opened the file and spread papers across her desk. First was Catherine Miller from Boston, arrived November 1880, rejected for being too timid. Second was Hannah Prescott from Baltimore, arrived March 1881, rejected for being unsuitable for ranch work. Third was Rebecca Cole from New York, arrived September 1882, rejected for being emotionally unstable. And now me, rejected for being too fragile. Exactly. 4 different women, 4 different rejection reasons, but the same pattern. He brings them out here, humiliates them publicly within hours, and sends them back east before they understand what's happening. Lenora felt sick. Did any of them fight it? No. They all left immediately, exactly like Caleb expected. Most were too embarrassed to even file complaints. Vivian leaned forward. But I've been documenting everything, saving copies of correspondence, tracking patterns. Because I knew something was wrong, I just couldn't prove it. The land trust. He's trying to collapse it. That's my theory. Each time a bride abandons the contract, the trust remains intact, but Caleb gets closer to arguing the whole program is flawed. Eventually, he'll petition to have the trust dissolved entirely, and then the land goes to public auction where he can buy it outright. Or, Lenora said slowly, he's been testing different approaches to see which type of woman breaks fastest, refining his technique. Vivian's expression darkened. That's a disturbing thought, but accurate. Look at the timing. Each rejection happened faster than the last. Catherine Miller lasted a full day before leaving. By the time he got to me, he was confident enough to do it right at the train station. Lenora examined the papers spread across the desk. He's been practicing. Which means you staying is the worst possible outcome for him. That's what I'm counting on. Vivian gathered the papers carefully. What do you need from me? Copies of everything, especially anything showing Caleb's specific request to the agency about what kind of bride he wanted. If his requests contradict his rejection reasons, that's proof of fraud. I can do that, but it'll take time to copy everything properly. How long? 2 days, maybe 3. I have to be careful. If Caleb finds out I'm helping you, I'll lose this job. Lenora understood that fear intimately. I won't mention your name unless absolutely necessary. Thank you. Vivian pulled out a ledger and made some notes. There's something else you should know. The Whitmore Trust land isn't just valuable because of water access. There's a railroad surveyor who's been mapping routes through the territory. If the railroad comes through here, and rumors say it will, that quarter section becomes worth 10 times its current value. Does Caleb know that? I'd bet money on it. He has connections everywhere. If anyone would hear railroad rumors early, it'd be him. Which meant Caleb wasn't just trying to secure valuable ranch land. He was trying to position himself at the center of Red Hollow's future economic development. With railroad access and water rights, he'd control everything. Lenora stood. Get me those copies as soon as you can. I'll come back in 3 days. Be careful. Caleb doesn't like being challenged. I've noticed. She left the bureau and found Elias waiting with the wagon down the street. He looked frustrated. 2 of the 3 buyers claim they need more time to pay, he said as she climbed up. The third suggested I could wait another season if I wanted to keep his business. That's not acceptable. I know, but what can I do? I need their business long term. You need their money short term more. Lenora thought for a moment. Give me their names and addresses. I'll handle it. You? I've collected debts before. People are more willing to pay when a woman shows up asking politely than when a man shows up making threats. They underestimate us. Elias looked skeptical, but handed her a piece of paper with 3 names scrawled on it. Don't expect miracles. I don't. I expect payment for delivered goods. They drove back to the ranch in silence, Elias brooding about his finances while Lenora mentally organized her next steps. She had 3 days before Vivian would have the documentation ready. In that time, she needed to collect Elias's debts, organize his books completely, and start building a case against Caleb that couldn't be dismissed easily. Also, she needed to do something about the state of this ranch before everything fell apart completely. The rest of the day disappeared into work. Lenora tackled Elias's bookkeeping with systematic efficiency, creating proper ledgers, categorizing expenses, identifying patterns in his spending that were bleeding money unnecessarily. By evening, she had a clear picture of his financial situation. You're not in as much trouble as you think, she told him over dinner, but you're heading that direction fast if nothing changes. What needs to change? Everything. Your buying habits, your maintenance schedule, your cattle rotation, your payment collection process. You're operating like someone who doesn't care whether the ranch succeeds. Elias pushed food around his plate. Maybe I don't. Then why haven't you sold it? Because Martha loved this place. Giving it up feels like giving up on her. Lenora understood that kind of grief, the way it could turn everything you once cared about into an obligation you couldn't escape. But understanding didn't make it any less destructive. She wouldn't want you to destroy yourself trying to preserve her memory, Lenora said carefully. You didn't know her. No, but I know what it's like to let grief make your decisions for you. It doesn't end well. Elias looked at her sharply. Who did you lose? Lenora hadn't planned to share that, but something about the quiet kitchen and Elias's genuine question made the words come easier than expected. My parents died when I was 15, cholera outbreak in Philadelphia. After that, I had a younger brother, Daniel. He was 12. She paused, old pain surfacing despite years of pushing it down. I worked 3 jobs trying to keep us fed and housed, but Philadelphia was expensive and I couldn't earn enough. Daniel got sick one winter, and I couldn't afford a doctor. He died 2 days before his 14th birthday. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. I'm sorry, Elias said quietly. It was 7 years ago. I should be over it by now. Grief doesn't work on a schedule. No, but it can trap you if you let it. I spent 2 years after Daniel died just going through motions, working jobs I hated, living in a room I couldn't afford, too guilty to actually try building anything better because he didn't get that chance. She met Elias's eyes. Eventually, I realized he wouldn't want me to live like that. He'd want me to actually live. So I saved money, answered the agency advertisement, and came here hoping to start over. And walked straight into Caleb's scheme, apparently, but at least I'm not standing still anymore. That's something. They finished dinner in more comfortable silence. Afterward, Lenora went back to organizing papers while Elias handled evening ranch work. She was deep in sorting invoices when she heard horses outside. Elias came in from the barn, his expression tense. We've got company. Lenora looked out the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 riders were approaching the house, silhouetted against the sunset. Even from a distance, she recognized the lead rider's expensive clothes and confident posture. Caleb Voss had come calling. Elias grabbed a rifle from above the door but didn't load it, just held it visibly as he stepped onto the porch. Lenora followed despite her instinct to hide. Running would only prove Caleb's assumptions about her. The riders stopped 20 feet from the house. Caleb sat easy in his saddle, flanked by 2 rough-looking men who were obviously hired muscle rather than ranch hands. Evening, Boone, Caleb called out, his voice friendly but cold underneath. Heard you were harboring my runaway bride. She's not your bride and she's not running, Elias said. She's working here temporarily. Legal work, legal wages. Is that what you call it? Caleb's attention shifted to Lenora. I came to offer you train fare back to Philadelphia, Miss Whitfield. No hard feelings. I understand the frontier isn't for everyone. I'm not leaving, Lenora said. You sure about that? Red Hollow's not particularly welcoming to strangers who cause trouble. I'm not causing trouble. You are. Caleb's smile tightened. Strong words from someone who doesn't understand how things work around here. Elias, you sure you want to involve yourself in this? I'd hate to see your ranch run into difficulties. Is that a threat? Elias asked quietly. It's friendly advice between neighbors. Miss Whitfield's presence is complicating a private business matter. If she leaves peacefully, everyone benefits. If she stays, well, he shrugged. Things might get uncomfortable for people helping her. Get off my property, Elias said. Caleb's expression hardened. This is your last chance to stay out of something that doesn't concern you. The lady asked to stay. My property, my choice. Now leave. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Caleb pulled his horse around, gesturing for his men to follow. Your funeral, Boone, he called back. Don't say I didn't warn you. They rode off into the gathering darkness, and Lenora realized she'd been holding her breath. He's scared, she said. Elias lowered the rifle. That was scared? Could have fooled me. He came all the way out here personally, brought muscle for intimidation, made threats he can't legally follow through on. That's not confidence, that's desperation. She watched the riders disappear. I'm staying longer than he expected, and it's making him nervous. Making him dangerous, more like. Probably that, too. They went inside and Elias locked the doors, which apparently he never did normally. Lenore returned to her paperwork but couldn't concentrate. Caleb's visit had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. Around midnight, she gave up trying to work and went upstairs. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the narrow bed listening to the old house settle, thinking about 4 other women who'd arrived in Red Hollow, full of hope and left broken. She wouldn't be the 5th. The next morning, Lenora woke early and made a decision. If Caleb wanted to play intimidation games, she'd play differently. She'd go straight at the problem instead of waiting for him to make the next move. She borrowed one of Elias's horses, a gentle mare who didn't seem to mind inexperienced riders, and rode into town alone, ignoring Elias's protests about it being too dangerous. Dangerous was letting fear make her decisions. Her first stop was the largest of the 3 cattle buyers who owed Elias money, a rancher named Thomas Garrett, who ran operations on the east side of the valley. His ranch house was impressive, well-maintained, clearly prosperous. Lenora tied her horse and walked to the front door, knocking firmly. A woman in her 50s answered, looking surprised to see a stranger. I'm here to speak with Mr. Garrett about an outstanding debt, Lenora said politely. He's not home. When will he return? Not sure. Could be days. Lenora recognized the brush-off immediately. I'll wait. The woman's eyes narrowed. I said he's not here. And I said, I'll wait. I've got time. Lenora sat down on the porch steps and made herself comfortable. The woman stared at her. You can't just camp on our porch. I'm not camping. I'm waiting to discuss a business matter with Mr. Garrett. Shouldn't take long once he arrives. She pulled out the invoice from her pocket and examined it. $300 for cattle delivered in October. Payment due November 1st. It's now May. That's 6 months overdue. We've had difficulties. Everyone has difficulties. Mr. Boone delivered quality cattle as contracted. Your husband owes him payment. Simple as that. The woman disappeared inside, returning 5 minutes later with Thomas Garrett himself, who looked distinctly unhappy. I told Boone I'd pay when I could, he said. That's not what the contract says. It says payment due November 1st. Lenora stood but didn't back down. I understand business gets tight sometimes, but Mr. Boone has his own obligations. He can't carry your debt indefinitely. Boone never pushed this hard before. Because Mr. Boone was being polite. I'm not Mr. Boone. Garrett studied her with grudging respect. You're the woman from the train station, the one Caleb rejected. That's me. Now, about the $300. I don't have that kind of cash available right now. Then let's discuss a payment plan. $100 immediately, the remainder paid $50 monthly until settled. Interest waived if payments arrive on time. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find grounds. That's reasonable, I suppose. Excellent. I'll wait while you write the first check. 20 minutes later, Lenora rode away with a check for $100 and a signed agreement for the remainder. 2 more buyers to go. The second buyer, a businessman named Charles Morton, who operated a meat distribution company, tried a different approach. Caleb Voss suggested I hold off on paying Boone until certain business matters were settled, he said when Lenora tracked him down at his office. What business matters? Matters that don't concern you. Actually, they concern me directly. Mr. Voss is trying to manipulate Mr. Boone's finances to pressure me into leaving town. That's called fraud and coercion. If you're participating, you're complicit. Morton shifted uncomfortably. I don't want trouble. Then pay what you owe. $80 for cattle delivered in December. Payment was due January 15th. I'll need to consult my books. Your books will say exactly what this invoice says. $80, overdue 4 months. Pay now or I file a complaint with the Territory Commerce Board. You can't do that. Watch me. I've got documentation proving delivery, signed contract showing payment terms, and a pattern of non-payment. The board takes these matters seriously, especially when they involve manipulation by third parties. She was mostly bluffing. She had no idea what the Commerce Board actually cared about, but Morton didn't know that. He paid. The third buyer was trickiest, a rancher named Samuel Pierce who claimed he'd already paid Elias in cash months ago. There's no receipt, Lenora pointed out. Boone didn't give me one. Convenient. So you're claiming you paid $120 in cash with no documentation, and Mr. Boone somehow forgot to record it in his books? I'm saying it's not my problem if Boone can't keep proper records. Lenora studied him carefully. Pierce was lying. She could see it in how he wouldn't meet her eyes, how his story had too many defensive details. But she couldn't prove it without evidence. Here's what's going to happen, she said. I'm giving you 3 days to produce something proving you paid. A receipt, a witness, a bank withdrawal record, anything. If you can't, you'll pay the full amount plus 20% penalty for the accusation. If you can prove it, I'll apologize personally. That's not legal. You're right. Legal would be taking you to court immediately for fraud. I'm being generous by giving you a chance to prove your claim first. She leaned forward slightly. 3 days, Mr. Pierce. Documentation or payment. Your choice. She left before he could argue further. By the time Lenora returned to Elias's ranch, she'd collected $180 in payments and commitments for the rest. Not everything owed, but enough to ease the immediate pressure on his finances. Elias stared at the checks like they might disappear. How did you do this? I asked politely and didn't take no for an answer. Turns out people will pay debts if you make it more uncomfortable not to. She handed him the written agreements. Garrett and Morton will pay the rest in installments. Pierce is lying about already paying you, so he'll either produce fake documentation or pay up. Either way, you'll get most of what you're owed. I can't believe you just rode out there alone and collected money from men twice your size. Size doesn't matter when you've got documentation and confidence. They assumed I'd be easy to dismiss because I look fragile. By the time they realized their mistake, they'd already agreed to pay. Elias laughed, the sound rusty, like he hadn't used it in a while. You're something else, Lenora Whitfield. I'm practical. There's a difference. But she felt pleased anyway. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt like she'd accomplished something tangible. The feeling lasted until that evening when Vivian Pierce showed up at the ranch unannounced, her face pale with fear. They know, she said the moment Lenora opened the door. Caleb knows I've been helping you. Lenora pulled her inside quickly. How? I don't know. Someone must have seen us talking at the bureau. Or maybe he has people watching. Vivian's hands shook as she pulled papers from her bag. I brought what I could copy so far. It's not everything, but it's enough to establish the pattern. Did he threaten you? Not directly, but his lawyer showed up at my office this afternoon asking questions about frontier marriage contract procedures, making it clear they know I have access to information they'd rather keep private. She handed the papers to Lenora. I can't copy the rest. I'm sorry. If I lose this job, I have nothing. I understand. Lenora examined the documents quickly. Letters between Caleb and the marriage agency, specifications for bride requests, rejection records for the previous 3 women. Not everything she needed, but substantial evidence of a pattern. Thank you for this. You've done more than enough. Be careful. Caleb's not just angry anymore, he's scared. And scared men do desperate things. After Vivian left, Lenora spread the papers across the kitchen table while Elias read over her shoulder. The documentation told an ugly story. Caleb had been systematic in his fraud, carefully orchestrating each marriage contract to create maximum emotional pressure while maintaining legal deniability. This proves intent, Elias said. Multiple victims, consistent pattern, documented planning. Any judge would see it. Any judge who isn't afraid of Caleb. How many of those are there in Montana territory? Not many, Elias admitted, but Martin Hale will know who to approach. We need to talk to him. They rode into town the next morning, arriving at Martin Hale's law office just after dawn. The lawyer was a thin man in his 50s, sharp-eyed and cautious, who listened without interrupting as Lenora explained the situation and showed him Vivian's documentation. When she finished, Martin sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is substantial," he said finally. "Not quite enough to guarantee victory, but enough to file charges. The challenge is finding a judge willing to hear the case." "Caleb has influence over most judges?" Lenora asked. "Not direct control, but significant persuasive power. Judges live in communities where Caleb holds economic leverage. They're reluctant to make decisions that might impact their own positions." He tapped the papers thoughtfully. "However, there's a federal circuit judge who'll be passing through in 3 weeks, Judge Harrison Cole. He doesn't live in this territory, so he's not vulnerable to local pressure." 3 weeks, Lenora repeated. "Can we hold out that long?" "That depends on what Caleb does next. He's going to escalate once he realizes you're building a legal case." "How much worse can it get?" Martin's expression was grim. "Much worse. Public humiliation was phase 1. Now he'll move to economic and social isolation, making life unbearable until you break." "I won't break." "That's admirable. But you should understand what you're facing. Caleb Voss has destroyed people before. Good people who thought they could stand against him. They all left eventually." "I'm not leaving." Martin studied her for a long moment. "No, I don't think you are. All right, I'll start preparing the case. But you need to document everything that happens from now on. Every threat, every incident of harassment, every attempt at manipulation. If this goes to trial, we'll need evidence of ongoing intimidation to strengthen the fraud claim." They left Martin's office with a plan but no guarantees. 3 weeks felt simultaneously too long and not nearly long enough. The escalation Martin predicted started that same afternoon. Lenora had stopped at the general store to buy supplies for Elias's ranch when the owner's wife, a brittle woman named Margaret Chen, blocked her path to the counter. "We don't serve troublemakers here," Margaret said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "I'm just buying flour and coffee," Lenora said. "Shop's closed to you." "The sign says you're open until 6. Private business. We can refuse service to anyone." Margaret crossed her arms. "Try the next town over, 40 miles east." Lenora looked around the shop. Other customers watched with mixed expressions, some uncomfortable, others openly hostile. This was coordinated. Caleb had spread word that helping her meant becoming his enemy. "I'll pay double the listed price," Lenora offered. "Not interested. Leave before I call the sheriff." Lenora left, humiliated but not surprised. She tried 2 other shops with similar results. By the time she returned to the wagon, Elias was dealing with his own problems. "Bank's calling in my mortgage early," he said, his face ashen. "Says they're reviewing all accounts and mine's been flagged for immediate repayment." "That's Caleb's doing." "Obviously, but knowing it doesn't change anything. I owe them $1,800. If I can't pay by end of month, they foreclose." Lenora did quick calculations in her head. "The cattle payments we collected plus the money in your account adds up to maybe $1,200 if I'm lucky, still $600 short. What about selling cattle early?" "Market prices are down. I'd take a loss." Elias leaned against the wagon, defeat written across his shoulders. "Maybe we should give up. I'm tired of fighting losing battles." "We're not giving up." "Easy for you to say. It's not your ranch on the line." "No, it's my future on the line, and I'm not giving it up because some cruel man decided he's entitled to everything he wants." Lenora climbed into the wagon. "Take me to the bank. I want to talk to whoever made this decision." "It won't help." "Probably not, but I'm doing it anyway." The bank manager was a nervous man named David Walsh, who clearly wished he were anywhere else when Lenora walked into his office. "The decision is final," he said before she even sat down. "Mr. Boone's account has been in questionable standing for some time." "His account was fine until this morning," Lenora countered. "What changed?" We received information suggesting repayment might be problematic. What information? From whom? Walsh shifted uncomfortably. I can't reveal confidential sources. Let me guess. Caleb Voss suggested you call the mortgage early, and you agreed because crossing him is bad for business. That's a serious accusation. It's also accurate. Lenora pulled Caleb's letters from her bag and placed them on Walsh's desk. Mr. Voss is engaging in systematic fraud to acquire land he has no legal right to. He's manipulating financial institutions to pressure people helping me. If you participate, you're complicit in his crimes. Walsh glanced at the letters but didn't touch them. I'm just following bank policy. Your bank policy involves letting wealthy clients manipulate mortgage terms to punish people they don't like? That's an interesting policy. She leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to reverse the early payment demand on Mr. Boone's mortgage. In exchange, I won't mention to federal authorities how your bank is being used to facilitate fraud. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening. I'm stating facts. Choose which side of this you want to be on when it goes to trial. She stood. You've got until tomorrow to decide. After that, I file complaints with every federal office I can find. She walked out before Walsh could respond, her heart pounding but her expression calm. Elias waited outside, looking stunned. Did you just threaten a bank manager? He asked. I pointed out the legal consequences of his choices. There's a difference. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but Lenora's mind was racing. Caleb was moving faster than expected, applying pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The next 3 weeks would be brutal. She was right. Over the following days, the harassment intensified. Someone cut Elias's fence lines, letting cattle wander. Supplies ordered from town mysteriously became unavailable. Merchants who'd been friendly suddenly claimed they'd never heard of him. But the social isolation was worse than the economic pressure. Women who'd been polite now crossed the street to avoid Lenora. Men made crude comments when she passed. Even the church refused her entry on Sunday, claiming all pews were reserved. Lenora documented everything in careful detail, writing down dates and names and exact quotes, building evidence for the case Martin was preparing. But documentation didn't stop the loneliness from seeping in. One evening, she found herself in the kitchen fighting tears while organizing invoices. She'd survived so much worse than this: hunger, actual poverty, real death. Why was social rejection affecting her this deeply? Elias found her there, took one look at her face, and sat down across the table. It gets to you, he said quietly. The isolation, even when you know it's calculated. I should be stronger than this. You're plenty strong, but humans need community. Being cut off from that hurts, no matter how tough you are. He poured them both coffee. Martha used to say loneliness was the worst part of frontier life, worse than weather or work or danger, just the endless space between people. How did she deal with it? Built connections deliberately, forced herself to keep reaching out even when it felt pointless. He smiled sadly. She was better at it than I am. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Lenora realized this was its own kind of connection. Two broken people holding steady against the storm, neither one fixing the other but both refusing to let go. The next morning brought different trouble. A rider arrived at dawn with a message. Samuel Pierce, the buyer who claimed he'd already paid Elias, was filing legal action for harassment and defamation, claiming Lenora had threatened him illegally and damaged his reputation. That's ridiculous, Elias said. You just asked for documentation. Doesn't matter if it's true. It's another pressure point. Lenora read the legal notice carefully. This will require court appearances, legal fees, time we don't have, all designed to drain resources and distract from the main case. So what do? We let Martin handle it, and we keep going. But keeping going was getting harder. That afternoon, the bank manager sent word. The mortgage reversal request was denied. Elias had until month's end to pay $1,800 or lose everything. Lenora stared at the notice, cold fear settling in her stomach. They were losing ground. For all her determination and planning, Caleb's wealth and power were simply overwhelming. Maybe she'd been fooling herself, thinking one woman could fight a man who owned half the territory. That night she almost gave up, almost packed her single suitcase and accepted defeat. Caleb would win. Men like him always won. Fighting just meant dragging Elias down with her. But then she thought about the 4 women who'd come before her. Catherine, Hannah, Rebecca, and one other whose name she didn't even know. All of them broken by Caleb's calculated cruelty. All of them sent away believing they'd somehow been inadequate. If Lenora quit now, the pattern continued. Caleb would find a fifth victim, then a sixth. He'd keep manipulating women and destroying lives until someone finally stopped him. She looked at the papers spread across her bed, documentation of his fraud, evidence of systematic abuse, proof he'd done this before. It wasn't complete, but it was substantial. And she had 3 weeks until Judge Cole arrived. 3 weeks to hold out. 3 weeks to survive. She could do that. She'd survived worse with less. Morning came with frost on the windows, unusual for late May but fitting somehow. Lenora woke stiff and cold, her determination from the night before feeling thinner in daylight. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Elias already gone, probably out dealing with whatever new disaster Caleb had arranged overnight. The kitchen was freezing. She built up the fire and put coffee on, then stood at the window watching dawn break over land that seemed determined to reject her. Beautiful country, though. She could see why someone would fight for it. Elias came in stamping mud off his boots, his face grim. 3 more fence sections down, he said. Cattle scattered halfway to the territorial border. Going to take all day to round them up. Sabotage? Wire was cut clean through, not weather damage. He poured coffee with shaking hands. This is getting out of control. It's supposed to feel that way. Caleb wants us overwhelmed. Lenora sat down at the table, trying to think strategically despite exhaustion. We need help. People we can trust. There's nobody? Anyone who helps us becomes Caleb's next target. What about the other ranchers he's pushed around over the years? They might want him stopped too. Elias considered that. Maybe. There's a man named Dutch Hammond who lost water rights to Caleb 3 years back, still bitter about it. And Sarah Chen's brother got run out of town when he wouldn't sell his land. She might talk. Then let's talk to them. Lenora, it's dangerous. These people won't want to get involved. Then we make it more dangerous not to. Caleb's power only works because everyone's afraid to challenge him together. If enough people stand up at once, he can't punish everyone. Elias looked at her like she was suggesting they fight a grizzly bear with sticks. That's a hell of a gamble. Everything's a gamble at this point. We're 2 weeks from foreclosure and 3 weeks from trial. Either we build support now or we lose everything anyway. She was right, and they both knew it. They spent the rest of the morning identifying potential allies, people Caleb had wronged who might be willing to testify or at least provide statements. The list was depressingly short. Caleb had been careful over the years to destroy his enemies completely, making examples that kept everyone else quiet. By afternoon, Lenora was riding toward Dutch Hammond's ranch, ignoring Elias's protests that he should go instead. A man asking for help looked weak. A woman asking for help just looked practical. Hammond's spread was smaller than Elias's, but better maintained, nestled in a valley with decent grazing land. Lenora found the man himself working on a fence line, a barrel-chested rancher in his 60s with arms like tree trunks. "Mr. Hammond?" she called out. He turned, squinting against the sun. "Who's asking?" "Lenora Whitfield. I'm staying at Elias Boone's ranch." "You're the woman from the train station, the one Caleb rejected." Hammond drove another fence post into the ground with 3 heavy strikes. "Heard you're causing trouble." "I'm trying to stop trouble. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing. Caleb's making life difficult for anyone associated with you. I don't need that kind of difficulty." Lenora dismounted and approached carefully. "He took your water rights 3 years ago. Made you dig new wells at twice the cost. That was legal trouble, but it was still wrong." Hammond's expression darkened. "Ancient history." "Is it? Because I think Caleb's been playing the same game for years. Taking what he wants, destroying anyone who objects, hiding behind legal technicalities while actually just being a bully." She pulled papers from her saddlebag. "I've got documentation proving he's committed fraud at least 4 times. If I can prove it in court, he loses credibility, maybe even loses enough power that people like you can challenge some of his previous actions." "That's a nice dream." "It's not a dream. Federal Judge Cole is coming through in 3 weeks. He's not local, so Caleb can't pressure him. If I can get enough people willing to testify about Caleb's pattern of manipulation and intimidation, we can actually win." Hammond studied the papers without taking them. "What do you need from me?" "A written statement about what happened with your water rights. Dates, details, how Caleb pressured you. Doesn't have to be long, just truthful." "And if I refuse?" Then I thank you for your time and leave. I'm not going to threaten you or pressure you. I'm just asking. Lenora held his gaze. But I think you're tired of men like Caleb getting away with this. I think you'd like to see him knocked down. And I think this might be the only chance any of us get. Hammond was quiet for a long time, working the fence post back and forth to test its stability. Finally, he spoke. My daughter wanted to open a store in town 5 years ago. Had the money saved, found a good location, had everything planned. Caleb decided he wanted that building for something else. Offered her half what it was worth. When she refused, he spread rumors she was unreliable, bad with money, not trustworthy. Nobody would do business with her after that. She ended up leaving Montana entirely. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, but maybe stopping him from doing it to someone else would help. He looked at Lenora properly for the first time. You really think you can win? I think I can try. That's all anyone can do. Fair enough? Hammond pulled off his work gloves. Come inside. I'll write down everything I remember about the water rights situation. Can't promise it'll help, but you'll have it. They spent an hour in Hammond's kitchen while he detailed Caleb's systematic pressure campaign, bought off officials, manipulated contracts, subtle threats that were never quite illegal but always effective. By the time Lenora left, she had 3 pages of testimony that corroborated the pattern she was building. 1 witness down. She needed at least 3 more to make the pattern undeniable. The next stop was Sarah Chen, sister of the man Caleb had run out of town. Sarah lived above the general store that had refused Lenora's service, which made the visit complicated. Lenora waited until evening when the store was closed, then knocked on the back entrance. Sarah answered, recognized her immediately, and tried to close the door. Please, Lenora said quickly, I just need 5 minutes. I'm not here to cause trouble for you. Your presence causes trouble. My husband already lost business because I was polite to you once. I know, and I'm sorry. But your brother Michael lost more than business when Caleb pushed him out. I want to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else. Sarah hesitated, then stepped back to let Lenora inside. The upstairs apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with careful attention that spoke of someone making the best of limited resources. Michael had a ranch north of here, Sarah said quietly. Good land, productive. He was starting to do well. Then Caleb decided he wanted to expand in that direction and made Michael an offer. Michael said no. Within 6 months, Michael's suppliers stopped delivering, his buyers stopped purchasing cattle, and mysterious accidents kept happening on his property. He sold eventually for 1/4 of what it was worth just to escape. Where is he now? California. Works in the factory? Hates every minute of it. Sarah's voice was bitter. He was a good rancher, loved that land. Caleb took that from him. Will you write that down? Not for me, for the judge. So he understands this isn't an isolated incident. My husband will lose customers if people know I helped you. I won't tell anyone. The statement goes directly to the lawyer, gets filed with the court, stays confidential until trial. Nobody needs to know you were involved. Sarah looked torn between fear and anger, the same expression Lenora had seen on Vivian Pierce's face. Everyone in Red Hollow lived under Caleb's shadow, too afraid to act but too angry to be completely silent. What happens if you lose? Sarah asked. Then I leave and Caleb wins. Like always. And if you win, then maybe other people can start saying no to him without losing everything. Sarah thought about her brother in California, working a job he hated because one wealthy man decided he wanted something. She thought about her own business losing customers because she'd shown basic human decency to a stranger. I'll write the statement, she said, but if anyone asks, I never talk to you. Deal. 2 witnesses. Lenora visited 3 more people over the next 2 days with mixed results. 1 agreed to provide testimony. 2 refused outright, too frightened to risk Caleb's retaliation. But 3 written statements plus Vivian's documentation created a pattern that would be hard to dismiss. Meanwhile, the pressure on Elias's ranch continued escalating. More fence damage. A barn door mysteriously caught fire one night, contained before serious damage, but clearly intentional. Someone scattered spoiled grain in the cattle feed, making several animals sick. This is insane, Elias said, cleaning up the contaminated grain. He's just destroying property now. He's making it expensive to help me, hoping you'll decide I'm not worth it. That's not going to happen. You sure? Because I'd understand if... Lenora. Elias straightened up, his expression serious. I'm not backing down. This is the first time in 4 years I've cared about something enough to actually fight for it. I'm not giving that up because Caleb Voss throws a tantrum. Something in his voice made Lenora look at him differently. The defeated man she'd met at the train station was gone, replaced by someone who'd remembered what it felt like to have purpose. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. We still might lose everything. The bank deadline loomed, 1 week until foreclosure if they couldn't produce $1,800. Lenora worked through Elias's finances repeatedly, trying to find money that didn't exist. Even with the cattle payments she'd collected, they were still $600 short. Then Vivian showed up again, this time with news instead of documents. The bank manager is wavering, she said, sitting at Elias's kitchen table. I heard him talking to his wife at the post office. He's worried about being on the wrong side when this goes to trial. Worried enough to reverse the foreclosure? Lenora asked. Maybe, but he needs a reason, something that lets him back down without looking weak or admitting he was wrong. Lenora thought about that. What if I offered to make a partial payment now and guarantee the rest within 30 days? That gives him an excuse to extend the deadline without explicitly backing down. Where will you get the money? Elias asked. I don't know yet, but it buys us time to figure it out. It was a desperate gamble, but desperate was basically their permanent state now. Lenora went to the bank the next morning and requested a meeting with David Walsh. He looked even more uncomfortable than before, which she took as a positive sign. I'm prepared to offer $1,000 immediately against Mr. Boone's mortgage, she said, with the remaining balance paid within 30 days. In exchange, you withdraw the foreclosure demand. Walsh shifted papers on his desk. That's not standard procedure. Neither is calling in a performing mortgage early because a third party requested it. We're both operating outside standard procedure. The question is whether you want to be part of a fraud case when it goes to federal court. You keep threatening legal action. Because I keep meaning it. I've got 3 witnesses willing to testify about Caleb's pattern of economic manipulation. Your bank's involvement will come up. You can be a victim of his pressure or a participant in his crimes. Your choice. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Where will you get $1,000? That's my concern, not yours. Do we have an agreement? He wanted to refuse. She could see it in his face, but fear of future consequences outweighed present loyalty to Caleb. Bring the money by Friday, he said finally. I'll prepare the extension paperwork. Lenora left the bank with no idea where she'd find $1,000 in 4 days, but at least she'd bought time. She rode back to the ranch and found Elias in the barn, looking defeated. I can't ask you to do this, he said when she explained the agreement. You don't have that kind of money. No, I don't, but maybe together we can find it. They spent the evening calculating what they could sell quickly. Tools, equipment, some furniture. Combined with cash on hand, they could maybe reach $700. Still, $300 short. What about the cattle? Lenora asked. You said selling early meant taking a loss, but some money is better than foreclosure. Market's still down. I'd get maybe $200 for the lot, and that's our whole herd. Leaves us with nothing for next season. Next season doesn't matter if we don't survive this one. Elias knew she was right, but the thought of selling his entire cattle operation clearly hurt. Those animals represented years of work, all that remained of the ranch he and Martha had built together. Do it, he said finally. Sell whatever we need to make the payment. They spent the next 2 days in frantic preparation. Elias contacted buyers while Lenora inventoried everything sellable. By Thursday evening, they'd scraped together $940. Still 60 short. Lenora sat at the kitchen table staring at the numbers, trying to make them add up differently through force of will. It didn't work. We could ask Martin Hale for a loan, Elias suggested. He doesn't have that kind of money. He said his own practice is barely profitable. Then what? Lenora didn't have an answer. They'd sold everything they could, collected every debt, squeezed every possible dollar from Elias's failing operation. $60 short might as well have been $6,000. That night she barely slept, her mind running through increasingly desperate options. She could try borrowing from the witnesses she'd collected, but they were all struggling themselves. Could try selling her own possessions, but she'd arrived with almost nothing. The idea hit her around 3 a.m, terrible and risky, and possibly their only option. She waited until dawn, then dressed carefully and rode to town alone. She went straight to Caleb Voss's ranch, the massive property that dominated the valley north of Red Hollow. She'd never seen it up close before. It was impressive. Sprawling house, well-maintained outbuildings, expensive horses in the corral. She tied her mare and walked to the front door, knocked firmly. A housekeeper answered, looking surprised to see her. "I need to speak with Mr. Voss," Lenora said. "He's not receiving visitors." "Tell him Lenora Whitfield is here to discuss a business arrangement. He'll want to hear it." The housekeeper looked skeptical, but disappeared inside. 5 minutes later, she returned and gestured for Lenora to follow. Caleb's office was exactly what she expected. Expensive furniture, territorial maps on the walls, leather-bound books that probably weren't read. The man himself sat behind a massive desk, looking simultaneously surprised and pleased to see her. "Miss Whitfield, this is unexpected." He didn't stand or offer her a chair. "I thought you'd have left town by now." "I'm still here." "So I've noticed. You've been quite busy making trouble." "I've been busy defending myself against fraud." "There's a difference." Lenora remained standing, keeping her voice level. "I came to offer you a deal." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "I'm listening." "You want the Whitmore Trust land. I want capital to fight you in court. Let's negotiate." "What exactly are you proposing?" "You loan me $2,000. In exchange, if I lose the trial, the land transfers to you immediately with no further legal challenges." Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And if you win?" "I keep the land and repay the loan with 10% interest within 1 year." "Why would I give you money to fight me?" "Because you're confident you'll win. You've got wealth, influence, local support. I'm one desperate woman with minimal resources. In your mind, this is easy money. $2,000 invested for guaranteed land acquisition." She held his gaze. "Unless you're not as confident as you pretend." That touched something. Caleb's expression hardened. "You're bluffing. You don't have any case. Then you've got nothing to lose. Loan me the money, crush me in court, take everything. Should be simple for someone as powerful as you." She watched him think it through. The trap was obvious if he looked carefully. She wouldn't be asking unless she thought she could win. But his arrogance was working in her favor. He couldn't imagine actually losing to her. $2,000 is a lot of money, he said. "It's nothing compared to what that land will be worth when the railroad comes through. Which you already know, or you wouldn't have orchestrated this whole fraud." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You've been doing homework." "I've been surviving. It requires paying attention." Lenora stepped closer to the desk. "You want me gone. I'm giving you a guaranteed path to that outcome. Either I lose the trial and you get everything you wanted, or I win but you get repaid with interest. It's actually a smart investment if you think about it. Or I just wait for you to run out of money naturally." "You could, but I'm more resilient than you expected and you're running out of time before Judge Cole arrives. What if I actually make it to trial? What if those witnesses I've been collecting testify? Even if you win, the publicity damages your reputation." She leaned against the desk. "This way, you look generous. The benevolent rancher helping his rejected bride get back on her feet. If you win the trial, everyone assumes you were right all along. If you lose, you still get repaid. It's practically risk-free." She was selling hard now, knowing this was insane, but also knowing they had no other options. Caleb was considering it. She could see him weighing the odds, calculating benefits. 10% interest is too low, he said finally. 20%. 15, that's already generous given the circumstances. Plus collateral beyond the land. If you lose, I also acquire Boone's Ranch at assessed value. That was vicious, but Lenora kept her expression neutral. "Only if Elias agrees to that term." "Then get his agreement. You've got until tomorrow to decide. After that, the offer expires." Lenora nodded and left quickly, before Caleb could change his mind or realize how desperate she actually was. She rode back to Elias's ranch with her hands shaking, unsure whether she'd just solved their problem or made everything catastrophically worse. Elias listened to her explanation with growing horror. "You want to borrow money from Caleb? That's insane." "It's strategic. He thinks he's guaranteed to win. That arrogance gives us leverage. It also puts both our properties at risk if we lose. We're already at risk. The bank forecloses in 2 days. At least this gives us a fighting chance." "Lenora, if we lose, then we lose. But we'll have actually fought instead of just surrendering." She met his eyes. "I need you to trust me. I know it's asking a lot, but I genuinely think we can win this. I've got documentation, witnesses, a pattern of fraud. Judge Cole isn't local. We have legitimate grounds. Elias walked to the window and stared out at the ranch he was about to risk. Martha would probably say I'm being an idiot. What do you say? I say I'm tired of Caleb Voss taking everything from everyone. If this is how we stop him, then let's do it. He turned back to face her. But if we're going to risk everything, we do it properly. I want Martin Hale to review any contract Caleb offers. Make sure there aren't hidden clauses. Agreed. They rode back to Caleb's ranch together the next morning and accepted his offer, with Martin Hale present to review the loan documentation. The lawyer found 2 suspicious clauses that would have given Caleb additional leverage, which they negotiated out. By afternoon, they had a contract that was merely risky instead of suicidal. Caleb handed over a bank draft for $2,000, looking supremely confident. "See you in court, Miss Whitfield," he said. "See you there." They deposited the money immediately, made the mortgage payment to the bank, and suddenly had breathing room for the first time since Lenora arrived in Montana. It felt strange not being in an immediate financial crisis. "What do we do with the extra $1,000?" Elias asked. "Save it. We'll need it for legal fees and expenses between now and trial." Lenora tucked the bank receipt safely into her documents. "And for rebuilding after whatever Caleb does next." Because the sabotage hadn't stopped. If anything, it intensified now that Caleb knew they'd secured funding. More fence damage, contaminated water troughs. Someone even took shots at cattle from a distance, not killing any but causing enough chaos to scatter the herd. "He's escalating to violence," Martin Hale warned when they reported the shooting. "That's dangerous territory." "Can we get the sheriff involved?" Lenora asked. "Sheriff's office is in Caleb's pocket. Filing a complaint would be pointless." "Then we document everything and prepare for him to get worse." He did get worse. A week before Judge Cole's arrival, someone started a fire near Elias's barn in the middle of the night. They caught it before serious damage, but the message was clear. Next time they might not be so lucky. Lenora woke to the smell of smoke and ran outside in her nightdress to find Elias already throwing water on smoldering hay. They worked together in frantic silence, containing the fire before it spread. "This has to stop," Elias said afterward, covered in soot and exhausted. "Someone's going to get killed." That's what he wants us to think. He wants us too scared to continue. Maybe we should be scared. This isn't worth dying for. Yes, it is. Lenora was surprised by the conviction in her own voice. If we back down now, Caleb learns he can do whatever he wants. Fraud, manipulation, violence. Nothing has consequences as long as you're wealthy enough. I won't accept that. Not anymore. Elias studied her face in the dim pre-dawn light. "You really believe we can win?" "I believe we have to try. That has to be enough." They spent the next few days preparing for trial with Martin Hale, reviewing testimony and evidence, planning their legal strategy. The 3 witnesses had provided strong statements. Vivian's documentation proved a pattern. The whole case hinged on convincing Judge Cole that Caleb had deliberately defrauded multiple women as part of a systematic scheme. "It's solid," Martin said during their final preparation meeting. "Not guaranteed, but solid. If the judge is honest and Caleb doesn't find some way to manipulate things, we have a genuine chance." "What are the actual odds?" Lenora asked. "Honestly, 50-50. This could go either way." Not the reassurance she'd hoped for, but better than impossible. The night before Judge Cole's arrival, Lenora couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed reviewing everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation at the train station, the discovery of Caleb's fraud, the decision to fight instead of flee. Every choice had led here, to one day in court that would determine her entire future. She thought about the 4 women who'd come before her: Catherine, Hannah, Rebecca, and the unnamed 4th bride. All of them broken by Caleb's cruelty and sent away believing themselves inadequate. This trial wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about proving that women like her, women without wealth or power or influential families, still deserved justice. That appearance didn't determine worth. That strength came in forms besides physical size. She finally fell asleep around dawn and woke 2 hours later to someone pounding on the door downstairs. Elias answered, and Lenora heard urgent voices, then footsteps on the stairs. "Get dressed," Elias called through her door. "We've got a problem." She dressed quickly and came downstairs to find Martin Hale in the kitchen, looking distraught. "Judge Cole's been delayed," he said. "Storm damage blocked the main road. He won't arrive for another week." A week? Lenora felt her stomach drop. Can we hold out that long? That's not the worst part. The court clerk received a petition this morning from Caleb's lawyers. They're requesting the trial be moved to a different jurisdiction, claiming local bias makes a fair hearing impossible. But Judge Cole isn't local. That was the whole point. They're arguing that since the case involves local property and local businesses, it should be heard in a county court rather than by a circuit judge. It's a delaying tactic, but it might work. Lenora sat down heavily. How long could that delay things? Months. Maybe longer. Martin set his briefcase on the table. And they've filed an additional motion claiming you entered into the loan agreement under false pretenses, which gives Caleb grounds to demand immediate repayment. If that succeeds, you'd have to return the $2,000 within 30 days or default on the contract. Can he do that? He can try. Whether it succeeds depends on the judge's ruling, but in the meantime, it creates legal uncertainty. Lenora felt the trap closing around her. Caleb had given her money specifically to create another lever to pull. Now he was pulling it, trying to force either immediate repayment or default, either of which would destroy her case. What do we do? Elias asked. Martin looked between them grimly. We fight every motion, oppose every delay, and hope Judge Cole arrives before Caleb finds a way to disqualify him entirely. But you should prepare for this to get much worse before it gets better. They spent the rest of the day strategizing, but Lenora felt the momentum shifting. Every day they delayed was another day for Caleb to manipulate circumstances. Another day for witnesses to get scared and withdraw statements. Another day for the pressure to grind them down. That evening, sitting alone in the kitchen after Elias and Martin had gone to handle other business, Lenora finally let herself feel the exhaustion. She'd been fighting for weeks now, surviving on determination and anger, but both were finite resources. She was tired, genuinely, deeply tired of being strong. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel defeated. Then she stood up, washed her face, and got back to work. Because Caleb Voss was counting on her breaking. He'd built his entire strategy around the assumption that enough pressure would make her surrender. He was going to be disappointed. The week that followed felt like slow drowning. Every morning brought new legal complications, fresh motions from Caleb's lawyers designed to delay and confuse. Martin spent hours filing counter-motions, arguing procedural points, fighting to keep the case alive while Judge Cole remained frustratingly out of reach somewhere on damaged mountain roads. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. Small things, mostly. Supplies going missing, equipment breaking in suspicious ways, cattle wandering through gaps in fences that hadn't existed the day before. Nothing dramatic enough to involve authorities. Everything calculated to exhaust and frustrate. Lenora documented it all with grim determination, filling notebooks with dates and details and descriptions. Evidence for a trial that might never happen. You should eat something, Elias said one evening, finding her at the kitchen table surrounded by papers at nearly midnight. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since breakfast. I'll eat when this is finished. Elias sat down across from her. It's never going to be finished if you work yourself to death first. Lenora set down her pen and rubbed her tired eyes. I keep thinking I'm missing something. Some detail that would make the case stronger. Some piece of evidence that would make it undeniable. You've got plenty of evidence. Martin said so himself. Martin also said it's 50-50 odds. I need better than that. You need sleep more than you need better odds. Elias stood and put the kettle on. Tea, then bed. The evidence will still be there in the morning. She wanted to argue, but couldn't find the energy. He was right anyway. She was too exhausted to think clearly. She accepted the tea and went upstairs, falling into bed still wearing her clothes. Sleep brought dreams of the train platform, Caleb's mocking voice echoing endlessly while crowds laughed. She woke before dawn feeling unrested and anxious, her mind already spinning through the day's tasks. Word arrived at breakfast that Judge Cole had finally reached the territorial office and would convene court in 3 days. Relief flooded through Lenora so intensely she felt dizzy. 3 days, she repeated. We can hold out 3 more days. Caleb's lawyers will file more delays, Elias warned. Let them try. Cole's here now. He can reject their motions in person. Martin confirmed that afternoon that the trial was officially scheduled. No more delays, no more procedural games. 3 days from now, everything would be decided. Those 3 days moved both too quickly and not fast enough. Lenora rehearsed her testimony until the words felt meaningless. Martin drilled her on possible questions, hostile cross-examination, tricks Caleb's lawyers might employ. By the evening before trial, she was wound so tight she thought she might shatter.
"You're going to be fine," Elias said, watching her pace the kitchen floor.
You don't know that. No, but I know you. You don't break. You've proven that already. What if the judge doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm just some desperate woman making accusations? Then we lose. But at least we fought. Elias caught her mid-pace and made her look at him. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already accomplished something important. You stood up when 4 other women couldn't. You made Caleb work for this. That matters, even if we lose. It won't matter if he gets the land anyway. It'll matter to the next person he tries to push around. They'll know it's possible to fight back.
Lenora wanted to believe that, but fear was louder than hope right now. She barely slept that night, finally giving up around 4 a.m. to sit at the kitchen window watching darkness fade into gray dawn. Today. Everything came down to today. She dressed in her least worn dress, the one she'd been saving for something important. Fixed her hair as neatly as possible. Tried to look like someone a judge would take seriously rather than dismiss as a desperate troublemaker.
Elias drove them into town early, the wagon rattling over familiar roads in tense silence. Red Hollow was already busy despite the early hour. Word had spread that this was trial day, and apparently half the county wanted to witness it. The courthouse was a modest building on the main street, usually used for minor disputes and property records. Today, it was packed. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding outside hoping to hear through the windows. Lenora walked through the crowd feeling dozens of eyes tracking her movement. Some looked curious, others hostile, a few sympathetic. Martin met them at the entrance looking nervous.
"Judge Cole arrived an hour ago. I spoke with him briefly. He seems fair, intelligent, not easily manipulated. That's good for us." He lowered his voice. "Caleb's lawyers are already filing last-minute motions. Standard delay tactics. Cole will likely reject them, but be prepared for anything." Inside, the courtroom felt smaller than Lenora expected. Wooden benches, a raised judge's platform, 2 tables for opposing counsel. She took her seat beside Martin and tried to steady her breathing.
Caleb entered 5 minutes later with 2 expensive lawyers flanking him. He looked confident, almost amused, caught Lenora's eye and actually smiled. That smile steadied her more than any reassurance could have. It reminded her exactly why she was here, to wipe that smug certainty off his face. Judge Harrison Cole entered precisely at 9. He was older than Lenora expected, maybe 60, with gray hair and sharp eyes that swept the courtroom, taking in every detail. He sat, arranged papers on his desk, and spoke without preamble. "This is the matter of Whitfield versus Voss regarding contested dissolution of a frontier marriage contract and associated property rights. I've reviewed the preliminary filings. Both parties claim fraud by the other. We're here to determine the truth." His gaze moved between Lenora and Caleb. "I'll hear opening statements, then evidence, then testimony. I expect professionalism from both sides. Understood?" Both lawyers agreed. Caleb's attorney went first, a smooth-talking man named Richard Green who painted Lenora as an opportunistic woman trying to exploit contract technicalities. According to Green, Caleb had acted in good faith, brought a bride west at significant expense, and reasonably rejected her when she proved unsuitable for frontier life. Any claims of fraud were simply attempts to gain property she had no right to. "The evidence will show," Green concluded, "that Miss Whitfield arrived unprepared and incapable of fulfilling the contract terms. Mr. Voss's rejection was justified under territorial law. Her current claims are nothing more than a scheme to acquire valuable land through manipulation of legal processes." Martin's opening was simpler and more direct. "Your Honor, the evidence will prove Mr. Voss orchestrated an elaborate fraud spanning multiple years and multiple victims. He deliberately contracted marriages with women he planned to reject, using calculated public humiliation to force them into abandoning contracts before they understood the property rights at stake. Miss Whitfield is the first bride who stayed long enough to uncover the scheme. That's the only reason we're here today." Judge Cole made notes throughout both openings, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Green, call your first witness." The prosecution started with character witnesses testifying to Caleb's good reputation and business ethics. A banker praised his financial responsibility. A fellow rancher described him as fair and honest. A town councilman called him a pillar of the community.
Martin's cross-examinations revealed cracks. The banker admitted Caleb held significant influence over local lending. The rancher acknowledged losing a water rights dispute to him years earlier. The councilman confirmed Caleb donated generously to political campaigns. So his good reputation comes partly from people being financially dependent on him? Martin asked. Objection, speculation, Green said. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Hale. Does Mr. Voss's financial influence affect how people in Red Hollow treat him? The councilman shifted uncomfortably. People respect success. Is that respect or fear of consequences for not showing respect? Objection. Overruled. The witness will answer. I suppose some people might be cautious about crossing him. That's just good business sense. By lunch recess, Martin had established that Caleb's sterling reputation was at least partially built on economic intimidation. Not enough to prove fraud, but enough to raise questions. The afternoon brought Caleb himself to the stand. He was smooth, confident, completely at ease. Described the marriage contract as a legitimate attempt to find a frontier wife. Expressed regret that Lenora proved unsuitable, but insisted his rejection was honest assessment, not malicious intent. I paid significant fees to the marriage agency, Caleb explained. Why would I deliberately bring someone west just to reject them? That makes no economic sense. Unless you wanted something other than a wife, Martin suggested during cross-examination. What else would I want? The Whitmore Trust property. 160 acres with water rights and potential railroad access. Caleb's expression didn't change. I own thousands of acres already. 1/4 section means nothing to me. Yet you've attempted to acquire that specific property for years through various legal challenges, all unsuccessful. I've made business inquiries. That's not a crime. You've done more than inquire. Martin pulled out documentation. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibits 12 through 18, correspondence between Mr. Voss and territory officials attempting to have the Whitmore Trust dissolved or redirected. Green objected, but Judge Cole allowed the evidence. The letters showed years of Caleb trying different approaches to acquire the trust land through legal manipulation. This proves interest in the property, Martin said. Now let's discuss how you tried to get it. Miss Whitfield wasn't your first contracted bride, was she? I don't know what you mean. You contracted marriages with 3 other women before Miss Whitfield. Catherine Miller in 1880, Hannah Prescott in 1881, Rebecca Cole in 1882, all rejected within days of arrival, all for different stated reasons. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. Those marriages didn't work out. It happens. 4 times? 4 different women? 4 quick rejections? All involving the same property trust? Coincidence. Or pattern? Martin handed papers to the judge. Exhibits 19 through 26, documentation from the Territory Bureau showing all 4 marriage contracts, all 4 rejections, and the specific property clause connecting them to the Whitmore Trust. Lenora watched Caleb's confidence finally crack. Just barely, just for a moment, but enough to show he hadn't expected this level of documentation. Judge Cole studied the papers carefully. Mr. Voss, this does seem unusual. 4 marriages contracted, 4 immediate rejections, all connected to the same property trust. You're claiming this is coincidence? Frontier marriages fail frequently, Your Honor. I was simply unlucky in my selections. Unlucky 4 times in identical patterns? I have specific standards for a wife. These women didn't meet them. What standards? Martin asked. Because your advertisement requested someone strong and capable, yet you rejected Miss Whitfield for being too delicate. That contradicts your stated preferences. I wanted someone strong. She wasn't strong enough. Based on what assessment? You rejected her at the train station without conversation, without testing her capabilities, purely based on appearance. Experience taught me to recognize when someone isn't suited for ranch life. Experience with 4 previous brides you rejected just as quickly? Martin's voice sharpened. Or experience manipulating women you specifically chose because they'd be easy to intimidate. Objection! Green was on his feet. Counsel is harassing the witness. I'm establishing pattern of behavior, Your Honor. The witness claims legitimate rejection. I'm demonstrating systematic fraud. Judge Cole considered. Overruled. The witness will answer. Caleb's expression hardened. I chose women I thought would be suitable. They weren't. I sent them home. That's not fraud. It's honest assessment.
Then explain why all 4 rejections happened before the marriage was formalized, preventing the women from establishing any legal claim to trust property. Timing was coincidental. 4 coincidental timings? 4 women rejected within hours or days, all before the contract's property provisions activated? Martin pulled out more papers. Your Honor, Exhibit 27, testimony from Miss Catherine Miller, the first rejected bride. She describes being mocked publicly for her appearance despite meeting all contract specifications. Sound familiar? He continued through testimonies from the other previous brides, each describing similar patterns: public humiliation, immediate rejection based on arbitrary physical assessments, pressure to leave before understanding their legal rights. By the time Martin finished, the pattern was undeniable even to hostile observers. Judge Cole called a recess. The courtroom erupted into whispered conversations the moment he left. Lenora sat very still, afraid to hope, but unable to stop herself.
That was strong, Elias whispered. Really strong. Martin nodded, but looked cautious. We've established pattern. Now we need to prove intent and damages. Lenora, you're next. When court resumed, Lenora took the stand with her hand shaking. She'd rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, but now, facing the crowded courtroom with Caleb staring at her, every prepared word vanished from her mind. Judge Cole's voice was surprisingly gentle. Miss Whitfield, please describe what happened when you arrived in Red Hollow. She started hesitantly, finding her words slowly. Describe the train arrival, the crowd gathered at the station, Caleb's immediate reaction when he saw her. He called me a starving little sparrow, she said quietly. Said the agency had sent him someone inadequate. He didn't ask my name. Didn't speak to me directly, just mocked me in front of everyone until I felt... She paused, the memory still sharp. Until I felt like I deserved it. Like I really was inadequate. Why did you stay? Cole asked. Because Mr. Boone offered me work, and because leaving meant admitting Caleb was right, that I was too weak, too fragile, too worthless to deserve better treatment. When did you discover the property trust? That first night. Mr. Boone helped me understand the contract terms I hadn't paid attention to initially. That's when we realized the rejection wasn't personal, it was strategic. She described discovering the previous brides, Vivian's help with documentation, the systematic pattern of fraud. Her voice grew steadier as she talked, anger replacing nervousness. Green's cross-examination tried to paint her as vindictive and opportunistic. You arrived desperate and penniless, correct? I arrived poor, there's a difference. You needed this marriage to survive financially? I needed stability. I thought the marriage would provide that honestly. So when Mr. Voss rejected you, you saw an opportunity to acquire property you had no right to. I saw evidence of fraud and decided to fight it. If that's opportunistic, then yes, I took the opportunity to demand justice. Justice? Or revenge against a man who wounded your pride? Lenora met his eyes steadily. Mr. Voss didn't wound my pride. He committed fraud against multiple women over multiple years. I'm simply the first one who stayed long enough to prove it. Green tried several more angles, but Lenora held firm, her testimony consistent and credible. By the time she stepped down, even hostile faces in the crowd looked thoughtful. Martin called his remaining witnesses, Dutch Hammond describing Caleb's water rights manipulation, Sarah Chen discussing her brother's forced sale, Vivian Pierce explaining the pattern she'd documented in territory records. Each testimony added weight to the fraud case. Finally, Martin rested. Green's closing argument tried to rehabilitate Caleb's position, claiming poor judgment in bride selection wasn't criminal fraud, that business dealings were separate from marriage contracts, that speculation about motives wasn't proof of intent. Miss Whitfield arrived unsuited for frontier life. Mr. Voss recognized this immediately and acted accordingly. Everything else is speculation and coincidence shaped into conspiracy by an angry woman seeking property she doesn't deserve. Martin's closing was simple. Your Honor, Mr. Voss orchestrated systematic fraud against 4 women over 3 years. The documentation proves it. The pattern proves it. The testimonies prove it. He deliberately contracted marriages he planned to dissolve, using calculated humiliation to force women into abandoning their legal rights before they understood those rights existed. Miss Whitfield is here today because she refused to be victim number 5. The question before this court is simple. Do we reward that fraud or do we stop it?
Judge Cole adjourned to consider his ruling. The wait was unbearable. Lenora sat in the courtroom while the crowd dispersed, unable to move. Elias stayed beside her, both of them too tense to speak. An hour passed, then two. Finally, the bailiff called them back inside. Judge Cole looked tired as he took his seat. He arranged papers on his desk, then began speaking in a measured tone. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony. This is a complicated case involving contract law, property rights, and questions of intent. However, certain facts are undisputed. He outlined the key points: 4 contracted marriages, 4 quick rejections, consistent patterns, documented attempts to acquire the trust property. Mr. Voss claims these are coincidental. I find that claim unconvincing. The pattern is too consistent, the timing too convenient, the documentation too extensive. This court finds clear evidence of systematic fraud. Lenora's breath caught.
Furthermore, the testimony establishes that Mr. Voss deliberately targeted women he believed would be easily manipulated, women traveling alone, financially desperate, unfamiliar with frontier law. He exploited their vulnerability for personal gain. This represents not just contract fraud, but fundamental abuse of the marriage settlement system designed to protect frontier women. Caleb's face had gone pale.
Therefore, I rule as follows. The marriage contract between Caleb Voss and Lenora Whitfield is declared void due to fraud committed by Mr. Voss. Under the terms of the Whitmore Trust, property rights transfer immediately to Miss Whitfield. Additionally, Mr. Voss will pay restitution to the 3 previous brides, totaling $500 each, plus Miss Whitfield's legal costs. The courtroom exploded with noise. Some people cheered. Others looked shocked. Caleb sat frozen, his expression somewhere between rage and disbelief. Judge Cole banged his gavel. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the territorial attorney for potential criminal investigation. If Mr. Voss has engaged in similar fraud elsewhere, those cases warrant review. This court is adjourned. Lenora couldn't move. She'd won. Actually won. The land was hers. Martin was grinning widely. We did it. I can't believe it, but we actually did it. Elias pulled her into a hug, and Lenora finally let herself feel the full weight of victory. Tears came, not from sadness, but from pure, overwhelming relief. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around. Some congratulated her. Others just stared, processing this unexpected outcome. Dutch Hammond shook her hand firmly. Sarah Chen hugged her, whispering, "Thank you," like Lenora had freed her from something. But the most satisfying moment came when Lenora saw Caleb emerge from the courthouse. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. Their eyes met across the crowd. She didn't gloat, didn't say anything, just met his gaze steadily until he looked away first. That was enough. The ride back to the ranch felt surreal. Lenora kept expecting someone to appear and announce there'd been a mistake, that she hadn't actually won, that Caleb's power would reassert itself somehow. But the sun kept shining. The land kept rolling past, and the court documents in her bag kept confirming what had happened. You did it, Elias said finally. You actually beat him. We did it, Lenora corrected. I couldn't have fought this alone. Maybe, but you're the one who stayed when everyone else ran. That took something special. Lenora looked out at the Montana landscape, harsh and beautiful, and tried to imagine actually owning part of it, having a place that was truly hers, that nobody could take away. It felt impossible and perfect and terrifying all at once. They reached the ranch as sunset painted the sky gold and red. Lenora stepped down from the wagon and stood in the yard, looking at the house and barn and fields that had become home without her quite noticing. What happens now? Elias asked. Now I figure out how to run a ranch, Lenora said. And you teach me everything you know about cattle and land management and surviving Montana winters. That's a lot to learn. Good thing I'm a quick study. She smiled properly for the first time in weeks. We should celebrate. Do you have anything besides terrible coffee? I might have whiskey somewhere. That'll work? They went inside together, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Lenora felt like she was moving toward something instead of just running from everything behind her. The whiskey burned going down, cheap and harsh, but exactly what the moment needed. Lenora coughed and Elias laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. They sat at the kitchen table with the bottle between them and the court documents spread out like proof that impossible things could actually happen. To beating bastards, Elias said, raising his glass. To surviving them, Lenora corrected, and they drank again. The victory felt fragile somehow, like it might evaporate if she looked away. She kept touching the property deed, making sure the ink was real, that her name was actually written there in official territorial script. 160 acres. Water rights. Her land. Nobody could take it from her now, except she had no idea what to do with it. I don't know the first thing about running a ranch, she admitted after the third drink loosened her tongue. Nobody does it first. You learn by doing and making mistakes. I can't afford mistakes. I've got a loan to repay and no income. The land's got good grazing. You could run cattle, sell beef, or lease portions to other ranchers if you don't want to manage animals yourself. Elias refilled their glasses. Or you could partner with someone who knows what they're doing. Something in his tone made Lenora look at him carefully. Are you offering? I'm suggesting. Your land borders mine. We could combine operations, use both properties more efficiently than running them separately. Pool resources, share labor, split profits. It made practical sense, but Lenora had just fought for months to own something independently. The thought of immediately tying herself to another man's decisions felt wrong. I need to think about it, she said. Fair enough? Offer stands whenever you're ready. They finished the bottle talking about nothing important, weather patterns, cattle breeds, which merchants in town were least awful. Normal conversation between two people who'd survived something terrible together and weren't quite sure what came next. Lenora went to bed drunk for the first time in years, her head spinning but her chest lighter than it had been in months. She'd done it. Actually beaten Caleb Voss in court, claimed land she had every right to, proven that fragile-looking women could be dangerous when cornered. The hangover the next morning reminded her that victory came with consequences. She stumbled downstairs to find Elias already working, apparently immune to whiskey after effects. He handed her coffee without comment, and she drank it gratefully, her head pounding. We need to visit your land today, he said. You should see what you actually won. The ride to the Whitmore Trust property took 40 minutes northeast. Lenora watched the landscape change gradually, rolling grassland giving way to gentler slopes, then flattening near a creek that cut through the valley like a silver ribbon. The land was beautiful in a stark way, endless sky meeting endless earth with nothing to interrupt the view. Elias stopped the wagon near the creek. This is it. Your property runs from that rock formation north to those trees, east to the fence line you can barely see, west to the road. Creek runs through the middle, never dries up even in bad summers. That's what makes it valuable. Lenora climbed down and walked to the water's edge. The creek was clear and cold, running over smooth stones with a sound that felt peaceful after weeks of tension. She could see why Caleb wanted this so badly. Water was everything out here. Control the water and you controlled survival itself. What would you do with it? She asked Elias. Me? I'd run cattle on the eastern sections, plant hay on the western side near the road for easy transport, keep the creek accessible for neighboring ranchers in exchange for seasonal labor. He walked along the bank, pointing out features. That rise over there would be perfect for a house if you wanted to build. Protected from wind, good view, close to water. Lenora tried to imagine a house here, her house, built with her own money on her own land. The image wouldn't quite form. She'd spent so long just surviving that actually building something felt impossible to visualize. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted. Run a ranch? Any of it. I'm good at accounting and organizing, not cattle and crops and construction. What if I fail? What if I lose everything I just fought for? Elias turned to face her directly. Then you fail. People fail all the time out here. Weather kills crops, disease kills cattle, bad luck kills everything. But at least you'll fail trying to build something instead of failing because you never tried at all. That's supposed to be encouraging? It's supposed to be honest. You can't control everything, Lenora. You can just make the best choices you can and hope they work out. She walked further along the creek, thinking about choices. Coming west had been a choice born from desperation. Staying after Caleb's humiliation had been pride mixed with survival instinct. Fighting him in court had been anger and stubbornness. But what came next couldn't be driven by reaction. It needed to be deliberate, planned. Her own vision instead of just opposition to someone else's. I want to try, she said finally. I'll probably fail, but I want to try anyway. Then that's enough to start with. They spent the rest of the day walking the property, Elias pointing out boundaries and features while Lenora tried to absorb everything. By evening, her feet hurt and her head was full of information she didn't quite understand, but the land felt more real, less like an abstract legal concept and more like actual dirt she could dig her hands into. The next few days brought reality crashing back. Word spread fast about the trial outcome. Most people in Red Hollow seemed stunned that Lenora had actually won, that Caleb had actually lost. The social dynamics shifted immediately. Merchants who'd refused her service suddenly became friendly. People who'd crossed the street to avoid her now nodded politely. Even the banker who'd tried to foreclose on Elias smiled nervously when they passed. Lenora hated it. The same people who'd laughed at her humiliation now wanted to pretend they'd been on her side all along. "You should accept their hypocrisy graciously," Martin Hale advised when she complained. "You'll need these people's business and cooperation to make your ranch work. I don't want anything from people who only respect me because I won. Then you'll have a hard time in Red Hollow. Most respect here is based on success, not character." He wasn't wrong, but it still tasted bitter. The restitution money arrived from Caleb within the week, $1,500 to be distributed to the previous brides, plus $2,000 covering legal costs. Martin handled distributing funds to Catherine, Hannah, and Rebecca through the marriage agency. Their responses came back within days. Catherine Miller wrote thanking Lenora for finally making that terrible man face consequences. Hannah Prescott sent a brief note saying the money helped, but couldn't fix what Caleb had broken. Rebecca Cole didn't respond at all. "They're not all going to be grateful," Elias said when Lenora shared the letters. "Some people just want to forget. I don't blame them. If I could forget the train platform, I would. But you can't, so you turned it into something useful instead. That's worth something." Maybe. Lenora wasn't sure yet what any of this was worth beyond survival and spite. Caleb himself disappeared from public view. Rumors said he'd left Montana entirely, though others claimed he was just laying low at his ranch. Either way, his influence over Red Hollow evaporated almost overnight. The bank reversed its aggressive lending practices. Merchants stopped coordinating prices. People who'd been too afraid to challenge him on minor issues suddenly found their courage. Lenora took no satisfaction in it. Destroying Caleb hadn't been the goal, protecting herself had been. That he got destroyed in the process was just unfortunate necessity. 3 weeks after the trial, Vivian Pierce visited the ranch with surprising news. "The territory is investigating the entire Frontier Marriage Program," she said, sitting at the now familiar kitchen table. Judge Cole's referral triggered a review of all contracts processed through Red Hollow and 3 other offices. They've already found 2 more cases similar to yours. Different men, same pattern of fraud. "Will those women get justice?" Lenora asked. "Nora, maybe. Depends if they're willing to come forward and testify. Many won't. They just want to move on." Vivian accepted coffee gratefully. "But the program itself is being reformed. New oversight, better protections, criminal penalties for fraud. Because of you." Lenora hadn't considered that possibility. "I was just trying to survive." That's usually how change starts. Someone refuses to accept how things are and fights back. Everyone else benefits from their stubbornness. After Vivian left, Lenora sat thinking about unintended consequences. She'd wanted land and justice for herself. Somehow that had rippled into policy changes affecting women she'd never meet. The responsibility of that felt heavy. "Stop overthinking," Elias said, finding her staring into space. "You did a good thing. Take the win." "What if I can't live up to it? What if everyone expects me to be some kind of hero now?"
Then disappoint them. You're not required to be anyone's hero. Just be yourself. But Lenora wasn't entirely sure who that was anymore. The desperate woman who'd stepped off the train felt like a different person. The angry fighter who'd battled Caleb was already fading. What remained was someone undefined, holding property she didn't know how to manage and facing a future she hadn't planned for. The practical problems helped distract from existential ones.
She needed to register the property officially, establish water rights, file territorial claims, arrange boundary surveys. The paperwork alone took weeks, complicated by the fact that the Whitmore Trust had been dormant for years, and nobody quite knew the current procedures. Martin guided her through most of it, charging minimal fees because watching you destroy Caleb was payment enough. By midsummer, the land was officially, indisputably, legally hers. 160 acres, water rights, mineral rights, if anything valuable turned up, and freedom to develop it however she chose. Now she just needed to figure out what that meant. Money was the immediate problem. She had about $800 remaining after paying legal fees and covering living expenses. Not enough to build a house, buy cattle, purchase equipment, or do much of anything besides survive for a few months. You could sell portions of the land, Martin suggested. Keep the creek access and maybe 80 acres for yourself. Sell the rest at premium prices. That would give you capital to develop what remains. Lenora considered it, but the idea felt wrong. She'd fought for this land specifically because it was hers, complete and whole. Selling pieces felt like admitting defeat before even starting. What about that partnership idea? Elias asked one evening. Combine our operations. I've got equipment and experience. You've got good land and water access. Together we could run both properties efficiently. And legally, how would that work? We draw up an agreement, keep the properties separate, but coordinate planning and share resources. Profit split proportional to contribution, land, labor, capital, whatever we agree on. What happens if we disagree about something important? Then we argue about it like adults and find compromise. Or we dissolve the partnership and go back to operating independently. It made sense practically. But Lenora kept hesitating, some instinct warning her against tying herself to anyone's decisions after fighting so hard for autonomy. Give me time, she said. I need to think about what I actually want before agreeing to anything. Elias looked disappointed, but nodded. Take the time you need. What Lenora wanted turned out to be complicated to figure out. She spent days riding the property alone, trying to envision different futures. She could lease the land to other ranchers and live off rent. Safe, but boring. She could try running cattle herself despite having no experience. Ambitious, but probably disastrous. She could sell most of it and keep a small section for subsistence farming, practical but felt like surrender. Nothing felt right. The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen stopped by one afternoon with her husband Thomas, the general store owner who'd initially refused Lenora's service. We wanted to apologize, Sarah said awkwardly, for how we treated you. It wasn't right. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Caleb had us scared. Still not an excuse, but it's the truth. Lenora invited them in partly because refusing felt petty, partly because she was curious what they actually wanted. Nobody apologized without wanting something. They sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while Sarah explained. My brother Michael in California, he's miserable. Hates factory work, misses ranching, wants to come back to Montana but has no land and no capital to buy any. You're asking if I'd sell to him? Lenora asked. No, we're asking if you'd partner with him. Michael's an excellent rancher. He just got pushed out by Caleb's fraud. If you provided land, he could provide expertise. Run cattle, manage operations, split profits fairly. It was similar to Elias's offer, but different in one crucial way. Partnering with Michael meant Lenora wasn't beholden to someone she'd grown emotionally entangled with. It would be purely business, clean and uncomplicated. I'd need to meet him first, Lenora said, and any partnership would require proper legal contracts. Of course. We can arrange for him to visit next month if you're interested. After they left, Lenora sat thinking about complications she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Her feelings about Elias had shifted during the fight against Caleb. What started as gratitude for shelter had become something messier. Affection, attraction, the kind of entanglement that made objective business decisions nearly impossible. Partnering with Elias meant mixing those feelings with practical concerns about property and money. That seemed like a recipe for disaster. But if she partnered with Michael Chen instead, Elias might feel rejected or betrayed. And that possibility hurt more than Lenora wanted to admit. She was still wrestling with the decision when Elias brought it up himself. Sarah Chen visited today, he said that evening. I assume she asked about her brother. How did you know? Because I know Sarah, and I know Michael's been wanting to return to Montana. Elias poured himself coffee. Are you considering it? Maybe. It would solve several problems. It would also put your best land in someone else's control. You'd be dependent on Michael's honesty and competence. At least with me, you know what you're getting. Do I? Lenora asked. Because I'm not sure I know what this is anymore. She gestured vaguely between them, and Elias went very still. What do you want it to be? He asked carefully. I don't know, that's the problem.
You've been incredibly kind and helpful, and somewhere in there I started feeling—" She struggled for words. "More than gratitude. But I can't figure out if those feelings are real or just trauma bonding from surviving Caleb together." Elias was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle.
"Martha died 4 years ago. I thought I was done feeling anything for anyone. Then you showed up, stubborn and scared and determined not to break, and something woke up again." He met her eyes. "So yes, I have feelings beyond partnership, but I'm not going to pressure you about them. If you want to partner with Michael because it's cleaner and simpler, I understand." "That's not fair," Lenora said. "You can't just be reasonable about this. What do you want me to do? Demand you choose me? Push you into something you're not ready for? I want you to make this decision easy." "It's not easy. Nothing about this is easy. You get to choose what you want without me making it complicated." Lenora wanted to argue but couldn't find grounds. He was being respectful and honest, giving her space to decide. It should have felt good. Instead, it felt terrifying because all the choice and responsibility landed squarely on her. She spent a sleepless night thinking about futures and risks and what she actually wanted beyond just surviving. By morning, she'd made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. She found Elias in the barn fixing equipment. "I want to partner with you," she said without preamble. "Combine our operations, share resources, build something together." Elias looked up, surprised. "You sure? Michael would be simpler." "I don't want simple. I want—" She struggled to articulate it. "I want to build something with someone who sees me as capable instead of fragile. Someone who respects my decisions even when they're difficult. Someone I trust even when I'm scared." "That sounds like more than business partnership." "Probably. But we can figure out the personal stuff while we handle the practical stuff, if that's acceptable to you." Elias set down his tools and walked over to her. "That's more than acceptable." He kissed her, and Lenora let herself sink into it, not because she was certain about everything, but because uncertainty was part of any future worth building. They pulled apart eventually, and Elias laughed. "We should probably draw up actual partnership contracts before we get too distracted." "Probably." Martin Hale helped them structure the agreement over the following weeks. They decided to operate both ranches as connected properties while maintaining separate ownership. Profits would be split 60-40 initially, adjusting as they determined actual contributions. Major decisions required mutual agreement. Either party could dissolve the partnership with 6 months' notice. It was practical and professional and left room for their relationship to develop or fail without destroying their business arrangement. "This is surprisingly mature," Martin said, reviewing the final documents. "Most partnerships I see are disasters because people don't plan for disagreements or dissolution." "We've both lost enough already," Lenora said. We're not interested in losing more because we failed to plan properly." The partnership officially began in late summer. They started by combining herds and improving irrigation on both properties. Elias taught Lenora about cattle management and seasonal planning. She reorganized both sets of financial records and negotiated better supply contracts than Elias had managed alone. It wasn't perfect. They argued about cattle rotation schedules, disagreed about whether to invest in new equipment or save capital for emergencies, frustrated each other with different working styles. Elias preferred intuitive decisions, while Lenora wanted everything documented and analyzed. But they worked through disagreements instead of letting them fester. And slowly, the combined operation began showing profit. By autumn, they'd paid off Elias's remaining mortgage debt and made the first payment on Lenora's loan from Caleb. Yes, she was actually repaying it despite his fraud because defaulting felt like letting him win retroactively. The ranch was producing enough to support both of them with some excess to reinvest. Red Hollow itself changed gradually. With Caleb gone, other people found courage to build businesses and challenge unfair practices. The town grew less oppressive, more genuinely functional. People still gossiped and held grudges, but the fear that had hung over everything lifted somewhat. Lenora remained cautious around most townspeople. Forgiveness came hard for her, and she couldn't forget who'd laughed at the train station or refused her service or participated in her isolation. But she learned to work with them professionally, which was enough. The personal relationship with Elias developed in parallel to the business one, slower and more careful than either of them expected. They were both people carrying grief and trauma who'd learned to be cautious about trusting anyone completely. But trust built gradually through small moments. Elias bringing her coffee before she asked. Lenora handling difficult financial decisions without needing his approval first. Learning each other's moods and boundaries, finding comfort in shared silence after exhausting days. One evening in late autumn, working on accounts together after dinner, Lenora realized she was happy. Not perfectly happy, not without complications or worries, but genuinely content in a way she hadn't been since before her parents died. "What are you smiling about?" Elias asked, noticing her expression. "This. All of it." She gestured around the kitchen, at the paperwork and coffee cups and comfortable domesticity. "I didn't think I'd ever have this. A home that felt safe. Work that mattered. Someone who sees me as a person instead of a problem. You built it yourself." "We built it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Maybe. But you're the one who stayed when everyone else ran. That took something I don't think you give yourself credit for." Lenora thought about that. She'd stayed partly from stubbornness, partly from having nowhere else to go, partly from anger at being dismissed as too weak to matter. But somewhere in that mess of motivations, she'd also stayed because she'd been tired of running, tired of letting cruel people determine her future, tired of surviving instead of living. "I'm glad I stayed," she said simply. Winter came hard that year, testing everything they'd built. Bitter cold, heavy snow, cattle struggling despite their preparations. They worked brutally long hours keeping animals alive and infrastructure functional. Several times, Lenora thought about giving up, selling everything, finding somewhere easier to survive. But Elias's presence made the difference. Having someone to share the burden with, someone to trade off night watches with, someone to complain to when everything felt impossible. It made hardship bearable instead of crushing. They survived the winter. Not gracefully, not without losses. They lost 6 cattle and had to repair damaged fences and equipment, but they survived. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, and with it came a letter from the Territory Bureau. The railroad was officially confirmed. Track would run through the valley, passing within 2 miles of the Whitmore Trust property. Land values would increase substantially. The quarter section that Caleb had schemed so hard to acquire would become worth 10 times what it had been. Lenora stood holding the letter, thinking about timing and justice. If she'd left after the train station humiliation, Caleb would eventually have gotten this land through some manipulation. He'd have been positioned perfectly for the railroad boom. His cruelty would have been rewarded. Instead, she owned it. A woman he'd dismissed as too weak to matter now controlled one of the most valuable parcels in the county. "The universe has a sense of irony," Elias said, reading over her shoulder. "Or just random luck. I'm not sure which. Does it matter?" Lenora thought about that. "No, it doesn't matter why I won, just that I did. The railroad brought development and opportunity. People moved to Red Hollow seeking work and land. The town expanded rapidly, transforming from a dusty frontier outpost into something approaching civilization. Lenora and Elias's combined ranch prospered during the boom. They sold beef to railroad workers, leased portions of land for temporary construction camps, provided water access to new settlers for reasonable fees. The money allowed them to expand operations, hire additional help, and begin building a proper house on the Whitmore property. 2 years after the trial, they married quietly at the ranch with Martin Hale and Vivian Pierce as witnesses. No church service, no big celebration, just a simple contract between 2 people who'd learned that building something together was harder and more valuable than easy romance. "Think you'll be happy?" Vivian asked Lenora afterward. "I think happiness is something you build, not something you find. So probably, if we keep working at it." That felt more honest than promising perfect happiness forever. Life was too complicated for perfection. The new house finished construction that autumn, built overlooking the creek on Lenora's property exactly where Elias had originally suggested. It was modest but well made, with room to expand if they ever needed to. Standing in the completed structure, Lenora felt the full weight of everything she'd built. Not just the physical house, but the life surrounding it. Land that was hers. A partnership built on respect rather than desperation. A future that felt possible instead of just survivable. She thought sometimes about the woman who'd stepped off the train 2 years earlier, terrified and humiliated and certain her life was ending. That woman had been wrong about everything except her own resilience. Word reached them eventually about Caleb. He'd moved to California and attempted similar schemes there, but got caught faster and faced actual criminal charges.
Last they heard, he was serving time for fraud in a San Francisco jail. Lenora felt nothing hearing that news. No satisfaction, no vindication, just indifference. Caleb had been an obstacle she'd overcome. What happened to him afterward didn't matter. Other news was more meaningful. Catherine Miller remarried, this time to a man she chose herself. Hannah Prescott opened a successful dress shop in Denver. Rebecca Cole remained a mystery, but Vivian reported she'd received her restitution money, which was something. The Frontier Marriage Program reformed significantly following the investigation Judge Cole's referral triggered. New protections, better oversight, criminal penalties for fraud. Women arriving west now had advocates and resources the previous generation lacked. Lenora took quiet pride in that, even though she'd never intended to change anything beyond her own circumstances. By the third year, the ranch was producing steady profit, and their combined operation employed 4 additional workers. They'd expanded cattle operations, started growing hay commercially, and leased portions of land to smaller operators who needed grazing space. It wasn't glamorous work. Ranching remained brutal and exhausting, full of setbacks and disasters and endless physical labor. But it was theirs, built through their own decisions and efforts. One evening, sitting on the porch of their house watching the sun set over land they'd worked to develop, Elias asked the question Lenora had been half expecting. "Do you ever regret it? Staying here instead of going back east?" Lenora thought about Philadelphia, the poverty and loneliness, the constant struggle just to survive, the feeling that life was something that happened to her rather than something she controlled. "No," she said. "Philadelphia was safe in some ways, but suffocating. Here I had to fight for everything, but at least I got to actually fight. That's worth something." Even considering everything with Caleb? Especially considering Caleb. He tried to break me and failed. That taught me something important about myself that I wouldn't have learned any other way. Elias reached over and took her hand. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky fade from gold to purple to deep blue scattered with stars. This was the future Lenora had built, not perfect, not without struggles, but genuinely hers in a way nothing else had ever been. She'd arrived in Montana expecting someone else to save her, to provide the stability and security she couldn't achieve alone. Instead, she'd discovered she was perfectly capable of saving herself, and that the best partnerships were between people who chose each other from strength rather than desperation. The land stretched endlessly before them, harsh and beautiful and full of possibility. Lenora had fought for her place in it, had proven that fragile appearance meant nothing compared to determined will, had built something real from the ruins of someone else's cruelty. That was enough. More than enough. As stars filled the Montana sky, Lenora allowed herself to feel something she'd thought impossible 2 years earlier. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be easy, but realistic hope that she could handle whatever came next. Because she'd already survived the worst someone could do to her. Everything else was just details to work through. And if she'd learned anything from the past 2 years, it was that she was very good at working through details. The future remained uncertain, full of challenges she couldn't predict and problems she'd have to solve. But uncertainty no longer felt terrifying. It felt like opportunity. She'd come west thinking she needed rescuing. Instead, she'd learned the most important lesson of her life. Sometimes the person you're waiting to save you is yourself. You just have to find the courage to stay instead of running, to fight instead of surrendering, to believe you're worth fighting for, even when everyone else suggests otherwise. Lenora Whitfield had found that courage on a humiliating train platform and carried it through months of harassment and legal battles and brutal physical labor. And now, sitting beside someone who'd learned to see strength in unexpected forms, looking out over land she'd fought to claim, she finally understood what she'd been building all along. Not just a ranch or a home or a successful business partnership. She'd been building proof that she mattered, that her life had value beyond survival, that being underestimated could be its own kind of advantage if you were patient and smart and absolutely refused to accept other people's limitations as truth. The night was cold and clear, full of stars and possibility. Somewhere in Red Hollow, other people were building their own futures, making their own choices about what they'd fight for and what they'd let go. But here on this porch, looking at land she'd won through sheer stubborn will, Lenora felt something close to peace. She'd done more than survive. She'd actually built a life worth living, and that, finally, felt like enough.